Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the April 5th City Council Workshop. And it looks like we have a full house today with the whole council present. First up on our agenda is the Destination Marketing Organization contract.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Susan is going to get some copies of the presentation to your attention in just a second. In the meantime, there is one and only one slide that I was in charge of, so I'm going to skip to that and discuss that for a second. And I believe you received a copy of this chart in an email in the last week. This is just a visual representation of some potential options that you have in deciding the amount to fund the DMO. Currently, as the contract is written at the moment, it's with the 30%, which is the fifth column. And what that represents is once the lodging tax revenues are collected, the 30% of those net revenues would then be turned over to the DMO. But of course, that's at council's discretion. This chart then has some different options. You see that fifth column showing the 30%, estimating the revenues that we anticipate to get with the lodging tax revenues. That would mean $635,000 for the DMO and would leave $459,000 to the city for tourism division and for land and buildings capital. Now, if you give less to the DMO, whether that's a dollar amount or a lower percentage, obviously that would leave more for the tourism division and the land and buildings capital fund. On the other hand, if you increase that to 40%, which is actually the maximum that you could possibly allocate to the DMO based on a current ordinance, that would be $847,000 to the DMO and only $247,000, which is the total amount that would be left over for the land and buildings capital fund. So that was just the intent of this, was just to show kind of a scale of if you give more to the DMO, it's less remaining for the city operations versus giving less to the DMO has the alternate effect. If there were any questions on this graph in particular, I'd be happy to answer those while we're waiting for Susan.
DJ, then Brian.
Sure. The blue portion, using 30% as an example, that 459,300. Do those have current allocations? I know that we fund public safety, parks, et cetera. Does that include those contributions?
This bar, which is the same height in all of these options, is the total amount that is allocated to the tourism division and to the land and buildings capital fund. Those two buckets are tourism directly related. So this excludes the public safety portion and things like that. And that's why you see on that far right option, the city would at least, bare minimum, keep the $247,000, which would go straight to the land and buildings capital fund.
Gotcha. Thanks for that clarification.
Brian, then Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Do you have any just rough estimate as far as the increase in the amount of that funding per year? I know it's probably not linear, but do you have any sort of information just roughly?
Doug might actually be a better individual to answer that question, being a little closer to the industry, a lot closer than I am. I base all of my projections just on trend, and of course the COVID-19 pandemic has completely destroyed that trend analysis. Before that, we were using about 3%, but that was very much an estimated guess.
Okay, thanks.
Rob, then Valerie.
So at the 30% line, it says what, 655,000 or something? Is that right?
635.
635. Sorry, I didn't get my glasses on. So last year, or I shouldn't say last year, we'll say just 2 years ago, the amount that Experience Grants Pass was getting, John Bowen's old company, was roughly 300,000. Is that right? Give or take? Excluding the Welcome Center.
I'd have to check the exact number off the top of my head, but that does.
It's in the ballpark.
Yes,
yeah.
sir.
Okay, so if we were to essentially fund the new DMO with, say, 300,000, that would be basically what we were paying John in the past, excluding the special events. So 655, we'll say, to this DMO would be roughly doubling that budget as far as what we were paying last year. Is that accurate?
Basing it on 30% of our anticipated lodging tax with the new 12%, that would be a significant increase of the city's funds being directed toward tourism promotion.
Right. So, I mean, there's other collaterals to tourism promotion, like funding the Downtown Welcome Center or whatever, you know. But we're basically paying about 300,000, give or take, and out of that 300,000, I'm trying to get this in my head, out of that 300,000, it's been reported many times that some of that 300,000 was siphoned off because John needed some extra funds to support some of the events that he was doing that were underfunded. So we were paying him 300,000 to basically do tourism. He actually effectively had a little bit less than that because he had to use some of it for special events. So the 655 would easily be more than double. So I just want to be clear in my mind that that's what we're talking about.
My understanding of the contract, whenever the special events, he took those on as one of his responsibilities, determining their impact on tourism. You know, were they 100% a community event, or did they have some tourism impact? That would take a deeper discussion.
No, I'm just talking about, though, the fact that the money that he would have had for the tourism part of it was probably even less than the 300 we gave, but call it 300. So this would be double. That's all. I just want to be clear.
Yeah, Councilor Pell, it's about double what we have been in the past, basically earmarking for travel tourism.
Thank you.
Marketing.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Adam.
Valerie?
Yeah, I just have a question because I do know that with the additional 3%, 70% of that is technically through Oregon state statute to go to tourism promotion. Am I correct?
That's correct.
So if you go any less than the 30%, then you're basically less than that. You're getting into that questionable area in terms of the state requirement for tourism promotion dollars. Am I correct?
So let me
Yes.
let me restate something that you said.
Okay.
The 70% has to go to tourism promotion or tourism related facilities. There's two categories that 70% can go to.
My question to that is I do know that, I mean, because it gets so convoluted. I mean, it's just totally convoluted. I know that the first 30% was to go to tourism promotion. And then the second time when we added on the 2%, we put a larger percentage at that point towards tourism facilities.
Correct.
We went 70% of that extra 2% at tourism-related facilities. So I guess I'm just a little bit confused as the difference between in the state statute if there is any designation difference, and I guess that's my question.
There's a designation different as such that one is tourism activity, tourism promotion. Mm-hmm. So that's that promotion, trying to get the word out about how great this community is, Grants Pass is, and get people to come here and stay here. That type of destination marketing type of promotion. And then the state Oregon Revised Statute also does provide for that 70% of the new percentage that we're getting to be also tourism related facilities that are directly linked to tourism activity.
Totally clear, but that's fine.
If I could add to that as well, tourism promotion, whether it's provided directly by the DMO or provided by the city through another mechanism would still qualify as tourism promotion.
Okay,
Joel?
thank you.
So is it fair to say then that the decision space isn't in the $1,050,000 or whatever the total sum is? The decision to be made is how that 70% is split up between these two entities, whether it's going to be the nonprofit or the city.
That's correct.
Okay.
Any other questions for Adam right now? Okay, we'll let Susan
With
get
no other
started.
questions, Susan, I'll pass out the presentations. Oh, yep, that's all we've done.
Adam, we may have a question from Rick here.
Oh.
Adam, is it accurate to say this is reflecting the new money, not the existing money?
It's reflecting the new 12% tax.
The new 12%, right? So I think what I would like to see too is see a chart showing the baseline of what we have now with the new 12% in there, similar to this, because I think where I get confused that we have a baseline coming in and then we're adding this to it. Is that a proper perspective? Or are we taking the entire amount, the old amount and the new amount, and that's what's in here?
I think this is
This-
the entire new amount.
Yes.
This is what we have to work with in total now. Yes.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
This is what we have.
What is the total amount?
The total amount is I think it's 1,050,000, based on estimates at this point, but.
Okay.
Rob?
So getting back to the 30% number there that says 635, if we were paying, and I'm not sure if you can answer this or maybe Aaron can answer it, if we were paying John roughly 300,000, and I guess plus 65 for the visitor center, I'm just not clear as to where the other 300,000 went. Off the top of my head, I can't figure out where else we were spending 300,000 on tourism.
Well, Rob, to answer your question, I think partly the DMO Pros study indicated that we were underfunding tourism promotion and that we were largely focused on events and not spending nearly enough on promoting ourselves. But obviously it's for council to decide how much you want to spend going forward.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, thank you for attempted clarity on that, but still, we were not on the events, we weren't spending 300,000. So.
No, and we were hardly spending anything on promotion either. So maybe.
Are you asking about the gap between the 300,000 we were paying Mr. Bowen and this option?
Yeah, exactly.
So we have a whole new 3% tax, and 70% of that new 3% tax is going towards tourism promotion or facilities. So we have more money to allocate now than we had in the past.
Okay, thank you.
Brian?
Just very briefly to help clarify for Rob, I think that there were some land and building projects that were tourism-related facilities in the past. For example, 100,000 went to Dollar Mountain, and there's projects like that that used up the rest of that money.
Can we let Susan do the presentation and then ask questions? Okay.
Oh, thanks. I thought I got out of the presentation, but here I
no
am.
such luck.
So okay, so we're talking about Destination Marketing Organization. And you're going to be reviewing the contract agreement between the city and Experience Grants Pass for the Destination Marketing Organization, known as Josephine County Visitors Association. And the relationship to your council goals is to facilitate an environment to encourage business prosperity and economic opportunities. So back on March 15th at the City Council workshop, Council had some direction, and one was to get input from the starter board regarding the DMO draft contract. Council wanted to hear any comments or concerns about the contract, and Council was asking for anticipated metrics, startup costs, and also you requested the bylaws from the board. Chair Bradley was also requesting a non-voting council liaison to be added. So anyway, after the March 15th workshop, the action that was taken was that the starter board and the attorney reviewed the draft contract. The DMO bylaws are in your packet. And there was a meeting with Councilor Lovelace, Chair Bradley, City Manager, and Brad Clark, CD Director, to review the DMO comments on the draft contract. And as a result of that meeting, there were a few outstanding issues in the contract that needed to be resolved. So here's the 6 performance measures in the draft DMO contract. And you have a copy of that now. And then Adam just went over this slide with you. And so the next slide is to bring Doug Bradley up for the conversation. Right now we're looking for additional feedback from the starter board and having that conversation with you right now. So I'm going to call Doug Bradley up to the, do you want to come up here, Doug, or you want to stay there? That's fine.
So before Doug takes the microphone, I just want to let you know where we are and where we stand with the contract. You know, we provided the DMO with a draft contract. They then took and made some comments, and Mark and I have gone over, and I met with Doug last week to go over some of those contract changes. Mark's reviewing those, and we'll provide a response with regards to their comments. So we've got another probably 1 or 2 more lobbies back and forth before we actually have a finalized draft for you. So there's still a little bit more time left in the development of the contract before we have something final for you to review.
Thank you. Welcome, Doug.
Well, thank you, Mayor, and I appreciate having the opportunity to be here in front of the council. So thank you very much for that.
Aaron, how do you want any questions or suggestions about the contract conveyed to you? And when?
Well, if you feel comfortable about addressing someone today, that'd be fine. You could talk to Mark and I about that in the meeting today, or you can send us an email and or give me a call, however, whatever's most convenient for you.
Okay, maybe we'll see with how this goes, maybe today or maybe in an email afterwards.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Hi, Doug.
Well, I am here mainly just to entertain questions, comments, concerns for the council that they may have in regard to the contract. I'd love to get into that, answer any questions you have, and then what I will do is take note of those, go back to my board, and understand the conversation, and we'll go from there to develop the contract that everybody's comfortable with. I don't have a lot of conversation to get into other than just making sure that I'm answering all of your questions to the best of my ability. And to coin Councilor Pell, we can make an attempt at clarity. But that's what I'm here for. So if anybody has any questions, concerns, I'd love to get into that just as quickly as possible and get your questions answered.
Thank you. Anyone have questions for Doug with the DMO? Vanessa?
Thanks for coming today, Doug. Under the board of directors and the required participants on that, can you explain the need for the financial interest piece? A representative of the financial industry, why that is required?
It's just good to have a wide a variety and diverse board members. That's really what that's for. It's always nice, I've been on boards before, it's always nice to have somebody from a financial perspective on the board, but that was also a recommendation from DMO Pros. So you'll find that just about everything that we're doing is following that direction. But even without that recommendation, typically we do look for people that have some kind of financial background. And we do have folks in the community that are very committed in the community, and we think that they would be a good choice, even without the DMO Pros portion. So.
Thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, I'll second that. It seems somewhat arbitrary to have someone from a specifically financial background on there, but the question I had is with the qualifications for the board members, it says they have to be 18 years or older and either be a resident of Josephine County or affiliated with a business located in Josephine County. So the way that it's written, we could have Joe that lives in Massachusetts be on the board if he had a business here, from the way I'm reading this. Is that accurate?
That would be accurate, yeah. But if you have a business in Josephine County, Grants Pass, you have a vital interest in what's going on with the DMO and tourism. I myself live in Medford and conduct all this, and so that helps me be able to do the work that I'm doing as well.
Other questions? Valerie?
I don't know if this is a question or just a comment, and I'm going to refer back to the DMO pros. Is one of the things they said is what they felt makes the best nonprofit DMO is when you bring in business and community leaders, like financial people, to make a more versatile board. So that was actually a recommendation that came through DMO pros.
One other thing I can add is that, like if you were in Massachusetts, one of the requirements is an active board, which means you would have to be in close enough proximity to attend all the meetings and be engaged in the processes that we have. So I think that would be a protection, in addition to the fact that the board is selected and appointed. And council would even be aware of that if that case were to come to light.
Rob?
So I think I guess it's a question, it's also a kind of a comment. What I see in the bylaws, what I feel is really lacking as far as the members of the board, there's nothing specifically in here that says anything about a representative, or I believe even 2 representatives, from the Downtown Historic District.
Okay.
And I actually feel that excluding the Historic District specifically would be kind of just as short-sighted as excluding the river or excluding the racetrack. In the report, in the DMO report, they never use the term historic district. They use the term downtown. Mm-hmm. And I just bring this up because the authors of the report, I don't believe ever visited Grants Pass. There's a lot of downtowns that could have big box stores or strip malls. That's not our historic district. Our historic district could be very legitimately considered possibly our biggest tourist draw. Mm-hmm. There's about 150 businesses. There's probably 1,500 employees. And actually, if you do the math on that, it's probably $200 or $300 million of gross revenues in the historic downtown. There's probably $30 to $40 million in payroll, mm-hmm. which then gets circulated around the city. So it's extremely important part of our tourist package, especially when you consider 6 months out of the year, most of the rest of the destinations are closed down in the winter. Mm-hmm. So historic district is a 12-month-a-year draw. It's, from a financial standpoint, it is the monster of all of them. Mm-hmm. And yet there's nothing on the bylaws that says, 2 historic district representatives need to be on there. I think that's a really big oversight. And again, I think it may come from the fact that in the DMO's report, they just said downtown. They never said historic district. Mm-hmm. So if you want to, I kind of look at this as maybe 5 or 6 different segments, like whether we've got the river, horse racing, restaurants, hotels, vineyards, mm-hmm. That kind of thing. I would say downtown is at least 1 out of those 5. The historic downtown is at least 1 out of those 5. And it's not in any way, shape, or form acknowledged in that way in anything that really DMO pros did or these bylaws. So I feel that in the bylaws, we need to have 2 representatives from the historic district, because I really feel that it's actually the biggest player, and it really needs to be represented at least as actively as any of the other segments.
Well, I agree with everything you just said. And I do agree that maybe we could take a look at that language, so thank you for bringing that up. I will take that back. The only concern I would have with that is it might exclude people that want to be involved that are outside the historic language. So you're right, that might need to be an actual separate line item. I did write that down. That does need to be acknowledged. I agree. Everybody would agree that the downtown is a tourism asset. So we'll look at that.
Thank you. There was a hand over here. DJ?
So at the beginning of the meeting, we started to discuss, percentage of TLT to contribute to the DMO.
Okay.
I think it's really important to understand, with referencing your metrics, in order to achieve your goals, what's that going to cost?
We have that coming.
Okay.
I had sat down and kind of attempted to do that, and it became clear it might be better for me to reach out to some of my resources in the industry. I will have that hopefully approved by my board on Friday to roll out to the council, and we'll get that to you as soon as possible. And I knew you were going to ask that today. So
Thank you, Doug.
I had actually planned to have that today, but I just couldn't get it clear enough to where I think we could all understand it, feel good about it. Because a lot of these numbers, they have to be based on a percentage. When you ask, how much is it going to increase or what numbers are we working with, we really don't know. But I can say from a speculative standpoint, from the industry, we are expecting travel to be gangbusters. Historically, smaller tertiary markets like Grants Pass have been very successful in times like we're in right now. Don't know that that's going to be the case moving forward, but this is kind of what we're expecting. Our hotels are already busy and doing very well. So I feel that for the rest of the year, even through the summer, it's going to go gangbusters.
Okay, one more. I got one more for you, Doug.
Okay.
So another thing is the term of the contract. It's been advised that we reevaluate 12, 14, 16, 18 months, somewhere down the line from starting point, to evaluate if the expectations are being met, the budget's correct, et cetera. And I think it's really important that we tie down the metrics and the budget so we have something to evaluate come 12, 16, 18 months, whatever it is that we determine, so we can make some adjustments. So keeping that in mind while you're producing these budgets, because we need that comparison. So if we don't have a good starting point, we have nothing to compare to when we reevaluate. So.
Which really is why we're having the delay, because we really do want to make sure that we're giving you the best information we can.
Sure.
And we do feel that, waiting a little bit to make sure that it's accurate or to the best of our ability is important.
Thank you, Doug.
Valerie, did you still have something?
I was just going to add to that, DJ, that another part or an addendum that has been attached to this actually has a lot of that in it. It has, it was originally written out as the strategic business plan exhibit from the city, but in a sense, it's not really a business plan. It is the metrics, because it has the scope and sequence of what's expected, and then it has the performance measures, the second part, that specifically say which data needs to be specifically spelled out. So that just hasn't gone over, had the time to go over as a board as well. This is just a monumental task in just getting, this first part done. So it is still out to be written into the contract. So that's why it's still there, and we are working really hard. That's why I think I talked with Aaron this morning, and I think that's why they added the page about the metrics, because we do know and understand how important those metrics are to this council. And that was definitely a recommendation from DMO Pros as well. And they need to be put in as an addendum to this contract, so they're spelled out in the contract.
Joel, did you still have something?
Well, I was just going to bring up that it has been discussed with me with other people on the council about maybe nonprofits. One of the advantages they have over governmental agencies is fundraising. And if we could have some written into the contract of the matching fund for fundraising, So which would give an incentive to the nonprofit to raise funds, they would be matched by the city, which would then leverage the city's dollars and provide an incentive for the nonprofit to be even more successful. So I would just ask that the group looking at that consider that, and if anybody else here on the council would like to speak up, because it wasn't my idea, but I thought it had some merit to it.
Rick, then Brian, then Rob, then Vanessa.
So on the Exhibit A, business metric, as Valerie was mentioning, the performance measures, I see everything in here is providing documentation showing how your ad ran and things like that. But what I don't see, and I don't know if it's appropriate or not, is it important to also include a comparison to another town or maybe two other towns that have a similar organization, how well they've done during that time? Because I realize during the pandemic right now, everything is down and every town is down. But if you just look at our town by itself, then you don't have I want to say the checkpoint to say, well, everybody else is down too, it's just not us. And to realize, are we doing better than they are or we're not? Is that in here in any form?
Well, it isn't, and I don't know if, cities' travel and tourism plans can travel very widely. I might suggest, something more along the lines of comparing our numbers to say 2019 versus 2020 or something like that, just to see if we're growing. And typically, as a hotelier, I just like to look at overall TLT taxes that are coming into the coffers is really the best way. Are they increasing? And from there, you can look at what kinds of business are coming in. Sometimes just because you're getting more in TLT taxes doesn't mean that those are necessarily DMO-driven room nights. So those are things that we need to kind of drill down on in there. But I don't know about comparing necessarily to another city. We can talk about that and look at it, however, and I'll put that on the list.
Because one of the things that bothers me there, we could show really good returns on the statistics here, but maybe if you compare it to, let's say, Corvallis or Redmond or something like that, and they've done twice of what we've done, so while we think we're doing great, maybe just the market in itself has provided that impetus rather than the DMO.
Okay.
Thank you.
Have that written down. We'll consider that for sure.
Brian?
Yeah, I just have another question about the makeup of the board. I think this is a really important point because, once we're off and running, that's what it is. So I do agree with Rob's point about the downtown historic district representative. And the question I had is, we have on here a minimum of 2 positions for representatives of lodging establishments. Yep. And I know previously there was some discussion about possibly having a representative that maybe represented smaller lodging that wasn't necessarily a hotel, whether it's bed and breakfast or an Airbnb or some other boutique style lodging. Was that discussion ever had as far as those 2 lodging members?
I think any of those would qualify to be on the board. I don't think any of those would be excluded necessarily. So if you're operating a hotel, whether it be a 100-room hotel or a 10-room hotel, I don't think it makes that distinction. You could certainly, either one of those be eligible for our board.
Do you think there would be any benefit to having that be a distinction? As far as having a hotelier and another lodging?
It would depend more on who it is. A lot of the hotel folks in town don't really get involved at the level, well, at least that I have, to make sure that kind of looking at these types of things. That's my experience. But we certainly wouldn't exclude them. I certainly haven't seen any applications come in representing any other hoteliers other than Tamara and I.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Rob?
Yeah. And I actually haven't thanked you, Doug. I appreciate all the work you're doing on this because it's a really exciting thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're going to get past the last 2 incarnations of this that didn't work very well, and we're going to make this way better. Mm-hmm. And I know that you work hard at it. You know, I go back to, and I don't want anyone to think that I'm taking this in the weeds. I'm just trying to make this a little bit bigger or more inclusive discussion, because you look at the DMO Pros report, and they actually say that the number one, the biggest question that we all have to answer first is, what is our number one goal? Okay, what is our number one goal? And I'm going to say that our number one goal really shouldn't be to increase room rentals or room tax. Our number one goal is to increase the economic viability and vitality of the entire city. That's our goal. One measurement along the way might be room stays. That also is nice because it brings in some more tax dollars and all that stuff. But that's not the end. That's in the same way that, you know, if you don't buy an electric drill to have it sit in your box just because you want to drill. You buy an electric drill to get the holes that you want to drill. You know what I mean? So the room tax is just part of the way. We want to get to economic vitality. And I have, along those lines, I have some other metrics that while the DMO is not directly responsible for those metrics, they would also be helpful in a 3 to 5 to 10 year look at whether or not our city is thriving through some of these efforts. So some of the metrics that I would like to see included, and again, I understand that you guys can't directly affect that, but they'd be indicators that things are going well. I'd like to track the number of new tourism attractions and facilities, including tap rooms, breweries, wineries, theaters, hotels, river outfitters, entertainment venues. These would all be signs that our economic vitality is doing well, and also most of these are tourism draws. I'd like to track the number of expansions on these same types of businesses, like Weekend Brewing or Vice or OPA. I'd like to track the number of new businesses that are opening in the historic district. I know back in the 90s, we actually tracked the number of vacancies that were in the historic district. And this is a little more challenging, although we can just track the number of visitors and/or sales at facilities that are willing to share that information. In other words, there's no way to really track because we don't have a particular foot count in each store downtown. But if there are some businesses that are willing to share their information of what they've been like year over year, by years 3, 5, and 10, it could really be very flattering to the DMO to be able to say, you know, all of these benchmarks have just increased in the last 5 to 10 years since we, you know, started different types of marketing and so forth. So again, because our number one goal is not necessarily room stays, but it is the economic vitality of the town, I think that those would be also benchmarks and metrics that we could track and should track.
Yeah, I think that we would look at these for sure, but this is something where I could see, you know, if we do have new attractions opening up and businesses expanding, that the DMO could definitely say, look at the job I'm doing. These are expanding. This is all part of the work that I'm doing. However, if they didn't expand, I don't know that that would be related to the lack of performance of our executive director, the DMO. I do think that we can look at those things, and they are important, but I see that kind of as one of those things you could use either way.
You know, I would totally agree that you couldn't, you know, be blamed if those things didn't happen, but it would be great to be able to say, look, these did happen, and if they didn't happen, it would also be an interesting discussion that they might want to have 5 years from now or 10 years from now. Gee, we seem to have expanded our tourism. Why aren't these other metrics happening too? So it would just be more data to be able to do a better job at this 5 years from now.
Yep, you know? I agree. Thank you.
Vanessa, then Rick.
I will second Councillor Pell's request to have a historic downtown a minimum of one representative on the board as well. Under the election and tenure of office, there is a clause that states, prior to the annual meeting, the Board of Directors will make a reasonable attempt to inform stakeholders of the available positions on the Board of Directors. I do see that the DMO board applications are open now, and the timeline for that is only 2 weeks. I think that this kind of foreshadows what we can expect a reasonable attempt to be, and I do have concerns about that. For someone who has the potential to serve a 6-year term, I'm afraid a 2-week timeline is not adequate, so I would ask that that's reconsidered.
Okay, we can reconsider timeline. And that press release is going out, I think April 16th is the final date that we put on there, I believe. So, yeah.
Rick?
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I might add that, you know, we wanted to open up the board or the applications for the board just to make a wide net. We are actually recruiting as well as part of that process. So, you know, the press release and to get people to participate was just to not leave anybody out, make sure everybody in the city, county knows what's going on, to give everybody an opportunity to approach us. So.
Thank you, Doug. I guess I'm sensitive to that too, because as Rob was saying, downtown is our crown jewel, and we want to make sure it's representative. And yet here, I know when you make a board too large, then it gets unmanageable. But I can also envision that if we don't see a geographic representation, we could have all the members coming from the perimeter of the city and not from the downtown, so I am concerned as well. Thank you.
Well, I would say 4 counselors have shared that concern now, so I'm understanding of that.
Brian, and then DJ.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on Councilor Augier's comment about the publicizing of the openings. I know that the city has it on their website. Where else is that being advertised?
Newspaper, county, and chamber are all, it's all out on those 4 platforms.
So you mean like the county website? Okay, and then chamber website. And then can you speak just briefly to the recruiting efforts you've been doing?
Well, we're working with people that are in the industry here, and we've kind of identified people that we would like to see on the board. So we may call them and say, hey, this is open, you may want to consider it. So that's kind of the recruiting effort that is being put out there. We have about 6 applications right now through the advertising that we've done, so I agree, it's not a lot is coming in from that. So I do think that in filling the board is going to be done mostly from the recruiting efforts.
Thanks.
DJ, you're up.
I wanted to address the Searchwide Global executive search for the candidate to fill the executive director position. It seems, and I'm just speculating here, so I want to clarify with you, that the expectation was that the city pay for this service prior to contract out of its own pocket, exclusive from TLT contributions to the DMO. That's what it seemed like when it came to our table and was moved from last Wednesday's meeting. Can you clarify what those expectations are?
Yeah, I wouldn't see it as that, though I'm not an expert as to how the monies are going to be spent, but I do know that we have a contingency of funds within the city to be used for the purposes of the DMO and setting up and moving forward, and even advertising dollars that are being used right now. That would be my understanding of where that money would be spent from. So it shouldn't come out of...
Just to completely clarify, the DMO Starter Board expects to utilize the city's contingency funds that's left over in the TLT dollars to help you get started?
Yes.
Okay, because we've never said that. We've never openly said, yes, you can start spending money. So it seems like that was the expectation.
Well, I think it's a question, or putting it in front of you, this is what we would like to do and like to get approved. So that was how you took it. I don't know that was the intention.
Sure, understood. So I think it's really important to have that discussion about what we can expect, because forward on the contract, low APR loan, something along those lines, that we're protected in any investments before we have this contract, rather than, you know, I'm concerned about funding something that we don't have an agreement quite yet with.
I agree, yeah.
So having that conversation about where does that money come from, how are we going to keep track of it, and what it's going to balance against is deserving before we move forward.
I agree, and I would also possibly have them come and do a presentation for you guys. You know, I looked at the presentation. I was very impressed with the services and what we can accomplish through this program. And I'm not a big spender. You know, I operate hotels and I see 25 grand and I'm like, oh, nope, can't do it. And that was kind of my general attitude until we started talking about it through the board. And my realization is that what we're doing right now is pretty important. So using a professional of this caliber, I think, is absolutely necessary. But that is a conversation that we need to have. And we'll do that certainly moving down the road for sure. So.
And then just to clarify, I'm not questioning the validity of the service.
Okay.
I'm not questioning the pursuit of a DMO. I'm just trying to elaborate what the expectations are and how we intend to move forward from here.
Yeah, the intention is to have it in front of council so you're aware of it and can eventually approve it based on having all your questions answered and feeling comfortable with it.
Rob?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, DJ. It's really important that we keep our pencils sharp and get those details, and I'm sure both sides, you know, I'm sure the DMO people also want to get that exactly, have our expectations exactly right. I had a question, and it leads to kind of a suggestion that follows up on what Joel was saying. In the DMO Pros report, it says in a couple different places, they're saying in a post-COVID time, but it's very important for diverse revenue streams, for the DMO to consider diverse revenue streams. And I'm just wondering if you guys have given that any kind of thought, you know, beyond the TLT is what they're referring to, and the ability to generate additional revenues, you know, from privatized DMOs are much easier than city organizations. People don't want to contribute to give money to the city unnecessarily. So, but have you guys discussed what kind of other revenue streams you're planning on pursuing?
Well, we have not. However, we do understand that bringing an executive director in the realm that we are will open up opportunities for fundraising and different things. Sure. And we may look for, you know, when we're looking at an executive director for the DMO, those kinds of skills. Well, I can't say on anything more than a speculative basis what those would be, but yes, their ability to raise money and understand how to raise money outside of what we're already be receiving would be looked at for sure in the hiring process.
Right. So I understand. I guess it would be the directors. Theoretically, that's their wheelhouse. That's their level. That's their area of expertise, and they'd be able to use your connections and the other board members' connections as leverage to potentially enact some of that. Getting back to what Joel was saying earlier, you know, I think there's probably enough room in our budget to potentially incentivize some of those efforts. And I think that could really be a really great opportunity for a kind of a win-win. Whereas, you know, if just pick a figure, you know, obviously they'd have to be dialed in and we'd have to have caps on it. But let's say the DMO were to raise through sponsorships and so forth, just say $50,000. Well, it's possible that the city could then match the 50 or 100 or whatever, some formula there. Yeah. And I'd like, when we're talking about in the contract, when we're talking about the percentage that the DMO would get, I would like to essentially figure that concept in to be able to incentivize, to have enough left over to be able to incentivize. That way you guys would get 2 for 1 on your sponsorship efforts. And we would get 2 for 1 on the money that we're paying because you guys are going out and doubling it. Right. So it would be absolute win-win, and I'd like to leave enough room in the contract to consider some kind of matching of your efforts, your private sector fundraising efforts.
It's a great idea. You know, those are the kinds of things that we, you know, that we'll look towards in the future. We can certainly put them in the contract or look at that as an option. But these are definitely things that I would consider would be coming from an executive director in kind of their plans and actions, what they plan to do within the first 90 days of receiving the position. So we're all pretty clear on what their course of action is, and then we all buy off on it. Or we would buy off on it as a board, show it to you guys, you know, so what we're doing. So we're going to have 3 sources of oversight. The council will certainly have oversight through the contractual process. The DMO board will have oversight because it's the board that's operating the 501c6. In addition to that, we'll have several audit points that will be going through the year as well. But to raise money outside of the taxes would be something that we would definitely want to be able to encourage. So,
Valerie? Yeah, I would actually like to add, and of course I'm going to bring you back to the DMO report as well, because the DMO report does talk about that it's nice to have a 501(c), which is different than a 501(c). A 501(c) is more of a trade organization, and so it's a nonprofit trade organization, which is kind of, you know, I've learned this only through the legalities of having to come up with bylaws and that sort of thing, that there's a difference between the two. And the foundation is a perfect place to put money that can then be leveraged to incentivize, and that is in his report that he suggests that that's something that comes down the line. And I would agree completely with that. I think what we're kind of dealing with here and what I'd like to see is that we have a couple different things. One of the things in the very beginning as a DMO starter board we had sent to the city is an agreement between McMinnville, their DMO. And unfortunately that didn't really come back, but one thing they have set in there is that first developmental starting costs, what that board needs to get started, and then a later date to where you can add on to that contract. Because a lot of these discussions, I agree completely, are very valid. I appreciate the Downtown Historic District. I think that's a great idea. I think that the storyboarding and building on that to have more money come through is also a very big idea, and it's in there. But I also just want to bring you back to the fact that what the DMO does suggest, what DMO Pros does suggest, is that when we jump off, that you give the starter board, give that board enough money to have more than one person. That's what shot John down, is he was a one-man show, and you cannot have a one-man show and promote the city of Grants Pass. He's going to need staff, or she's going to need staff. The person is going to need staff. And so their proposal was basically $500,000 so they could maintain a staff of 3 to do all of the things that we're expecting them to do. And so I just want to bring that forward as a point that it is in that there is a recommendation from DMO Pros, and that was the biggest one, is don't shortchange that DMO starter board, or that DMO starter, the board to begin with, because that is the driver, and then all of those other things will come later. So I support all of the things that you're saying, and I agree that the plus about it is that they can raise money. But when you bring somebody on in the first year, to expect them to do all that and all is, I think, too much. So I think it might behoove us to do a starter, a contract that lets us go in the very beginning and then build upon that as the time goes, which brings us to that clause that I think we need to really talk about, which is the elephant in the room, and that is the termination clause, because I think that was a point that needed to be brought up. And I think especially as we go through this beginning state, we need to kind of have an idea of what we as the council expects. And I'll just say, because what basically the city put a no cause termination, just 120 days, boom. The lawyer through the DMO starter board came back and said, wait a minute, you need to think about this a little stronger. And so I just think that's a conversation that needs to be had, because that to me was the biggest discrepancy between the two. And I do think there's a big difference. I mean, when the board asked for a 5-year contract, I don't think they asked, say, hey, just let us run for 5 years. That was never in there. And so I think that's the discussion that we need to have as to how do we build upon that with moving forward in the contract.
DJ, then Rob.
What about expenditures to date? You know, I'm sure you've utilized some legal services, et cetera.
We have. In fact, I brought about $100 worth of receipts from me today that I'm going to finally take care of if I get an opportunity. In addition, I think some of our attorney expenses have come directly to the city, so I'm not aware of what those are. I kind of think they're kind of the $7,000 to $10,000 range at this point.
Okay, so that's concerning that you have receipts that you're going to be bringing that we're being expected to pay. it's time is now to have that conversation about how we're gonna handle those expenditures. Have we written any checks so far? Because nobody on this council has approved any dollars going to the DMO yet. And I wanna have that discussion.
To answer your question specifically, I'd have to look up the transactions. I wouldn't be able to answer it off the top of my head.
Sure, I can't imagine that it's a substantial cost at this point, but before we start facilitating transactions and funneling money to the DMO, we need an approval process.
Yeah, we did discuss at a former workshop, I think, that it's small incidentals associated with the startup, and mentioning that the city would have to front load that to some degree. And so that makes sense that they're gonna have some of those. One of the key things is that $25,000 that we wanted to make sure we brought forward to you as your acknowledgement, because that's not just a minor front load thing of getting started. We recognize that we had a general discussion, a small discussion, that there is going to be some startup costs associated with it, and they don't have any money.
Understood.
And
but
that
they have yet to tell us what those startup costs are. They have yet to tell us what we can expect to pay. We're just going on a rolling basis here, you know. My anticipation was that we were told what it's going to cost, attorney's fees, et cetera, rolling up a bill so we can expect that we're going to have these costs. We're blindly writing checks at this point, to put it bluntly. We need those numbers. We need those expectations. We have to know what bills are you racking up? What bills do you anticipate to rack up? What is the sum total of your expected cost for startup? You know, before we start getting ahead of ourselves.
Give me a moment, I have something I can share with you.
Okay.
Let's have, Karen can make some copies for us and give one to everybody. He has kind of a speculative budget for the DMO to share. And I'll just add, Aaron, I do recall that conversation. I don't remember whether it was before I was mayor or while I was mayor, but I do remember at some point the council giving, you know, an acknowledgement that we would cover the costs of getting things rolling, because they were obviously going to incur some expenses such as consulting with an attorney before they were actually an organization. Rob?
Yeah, Aaron or Doug, I would assume that DMO Pros might be able to fill in any gaps there as far as giving us an estimate too on what it's going to cost to get it rolling, if they haven't already.
We're working on something different than that, though. We're working on something that will be the startup cost for the executive director. That's a separate budget. So I think what DJ's asking for is, what is the starter board going to spend in the interim? Okay. And that's a fair question.
Well, if you're confident with your figures, that's fine. I was just suggesting that could be another source of getting that data. You know, while, you know, I heard that there was a kind of an issue about the termination clause in the contract, and I just, while that's super important to both parties, you know, just for every possible reason the city's lawyer and the DMO's lawyer would ever come up with, it's quite frankly, hopefully not that big a deal. A termination clause is not a management tool. It's basically a nuclear button that says, you've got to cut your losses right now. Hopefully we never get to it, whether there's a 20-day buffer and all that kind of stuff, I guess, that was negotiated back and forth. That makes total sense. But it's not something to get hung up over. We just have to have the lawyers both be comfortable. It's a really small part of managing this thing. So that doesn't, well, we've got to, like I say, our lawyers got to be satisfied with it. It shouldn't be a big deal. What is a bigger deal is being able to have regular check-ins with the council, presenting, you know, I don't think that there's nobody on the council, and actually there's nobody on the council that expects this DMO board or the DMO to have this perfected in a year. Like, we're not looking at that. We're looking at having this improved grants passed for 3 to 10 years in the future or more. And I would also hope that the board doesn't expect to have this thing dialed in a year. But what I'm sure, I would imagine, I'm speaking for the whole council, in a year, we want to know that, yeah, we're heading in the right direction. We've got some signs that things are going in the right direction. We have, in a year, we know that we can double down on some things and maybe cut out other things. And what's really, that's going to come down, and the analytics are really going to help that. And that was actually the downfall of the last attempt, was that there was no analytics. I mean, so just very, very briefly, I mean, I do one small promotion with lost customer contacts to try to get them back in. And I had a 3-postcard sequence, and I discovered that through analytics that I was getting 80% of my benefit from the first postcard. Okay, well then why do the second 2, really? So the analytics are gonna, and that's what we're hoping, I think, within a year, is to get a sense that we are moving in the right direction. You guys wanna have a sense that you hired the right director, all that stuff. But the termination clause, you gotta satisfy your lawyers on both sides, but we can easily get.
Well, I agree with you. The overall goal that the starter board wants to accomplish is making sure that the council is comfortable with the direction that we're going. We think that you are. We've done a lot of work to facilitate that. But you should have questions. And that's why I like being able to come and have these conversations with you guys. Neither one of us wants to be stuck with an underperforming executive director, especially if it's identified right away and we need to make another decision. Which, by the way, the hiring organization gives a year guarantee on that. So if there's a year that goes by, we can make that change. I think it just needed to be a little more mutual. I have already read, that's really the only, what I would consider sticking point, and I wouldn't even necessarily use that word. I've already read it, and I didn't personally have a problem with it, but we'll take this past the board on Friday and see what they say. But to me, it looked like it's what we needed to say. In addition to the fact that you guys may want more oversight in the beginning, and as trust is gained, as things are working, we may be able to kind of say, hey, maybe we need to unfetter or let some of these things go, or whatever the case may be. But right up front, I think we both need to be very cognizant of the performance of both the board and the executive director. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And getting into the contract, again, I wasn't sure exactly where to bring this in, but in the draft, there was kind of an expectation, I guess, in the draft that I read. I may even be one draft behind in my, I'm not sure which draft I got, but
I'm with you.
there was a kind of a 5-year expectation, and that could be reasonable to the council, but for many of the reasons you just said, I also think that there needs to be basically a 1-year segment. This is just my opinion. Obviously, the council would have to think about it. A 1-year segment where we absolutely are evaluating all the things you just mentioned, and then maybe there's the next segment is 1.5 years or 2 years. But a 5-year contract to me on not only a new organization but a new managing director, that to me was just like, that to me was a really red flag.
Let me explain a little bit on that. First of all, if we have an underperforming executive director, we would be able to terminate with or without the 5-year contract. That's what that termination clause allows, right? If I'm not mistaken. The reason we want the 5-year term is because we want the executive director to have a good amount of time to set long-term goals, and then the second term to be another 5 years. So this executive director would be able to look at a length of 10 years with a certain level of expectation that contract would be renewed on an ongoing basis. But I think that as long as we have the ability to terminate with or without cause, that the length of the contract is really not necessarily needs to change based on that. Do you agree with that?
Well, I don't know that I agree with that. What I would agree with is if you had a 5-year situation that was broken into 12-month segments, it'd be a lot easier for you to come in and say, you know, we're X percent of the way towards our goal. This is kind of what we expected at the 1 year point. And that may exceed council's expectations. It may fall behind what council's expectations were.
Right.
And then a discussion has to happen. But it needs to be broken down in bite-sized pieces so that there's a lot more room for input and flexibility, change of direction, things like that. Or I shouldn't say change of direction, slight pivot here or there. But, and I understand, you know, the director wants to have a nice chunk of time, but he also needs, he or she needs to also know that, look, I got benchmarks and I have certain benchmarks I need to meet in certain times. And that may just be setting up some of the processes that are going to get him to or her to. But it's got to be broken down. If it were a 5-year deal, it has to be broken down into much smaller chunks, bite-sized chunks.
Well, yeah, I see the evaluation process being, you know, 90 days, 1 year, as we're getting out of the gate on the 5-year contract. Right. We can take a look at that language if we need to, but that's kind of how we were looking at it.
Thank you. Yep.
Brian, then Valerie, then Rick.
You're doing great, Doug. Thank you. So I see in the contract on the top of page 3, there's a paragraph about transfer of city assets, and it talks about, you know, transferring to experience grants past things like website content, photos, articles, social media accounts, and all that. As it pertains to the termination contract, I don't know that I saw anything in there about those materials transferring back to the city, but I think if that's not in there, that might be a prudent thing to consider. Okay. If that ever needs to happen, which I hope it doesn't, but I just noticed that piece. And then I also had a question about, has the starter board had any discussions around estimated compensation for the executive director, or the amount of funds percentage-wise that would be used for staff as opposed to marketing and advertising, or any kind of specifics on that piece?
For staff and administrative, you're looking at about 30% of whatever the contract amount is, whatever the contract amount is typically. So we're looking at an executive director probably earns somewhere in the neighborhood of, what, I don't know, 50 to 70,000 a year based on the contract.
Okay, thanks.
Valerie?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that there is built in to the agreement, there's an annual business plan that the director actually puts together, and I'm sure they have to go through the board, and then it also has to be presented to the council. So that is written into the contract, that they on an annual basis give a presentation and talk about the metrics and whether they're meeting and that sort of thing. So it is actually built into the contract that they have an annual requirement to report to the council regarding the business plan. And it says in there specifically that at that point the city can give recommendations to, you know, they can solicit recommendations. So I know it's in here somewhere.
Rick, then Rob.
So Doug, on Searchlight Global, is this a service that's normally done when you search for an executive director? I mean, you don't go to HR or something like that. You go to a service like this, and then because of their expertise in this field, or give me,
I personally have never
example?
used a service like this, which is probably why I was the first one at the table hedging and I was the chair, because again, I look at dollars and figures. But we had a presentation from her, and there was so many things that she will do for you in her search and the services that she offers. The board was able to convince me what a no-brainer that was, really. And she strictly works with DMO placement. So yeah, it's not just an overall thing. And we'd love to have her come in and do I think a presentation for you guys if we can sway her to do that for us. So.
Rob? Then DJ?
Yeah, I like you, Doug, I also kind of had sticker shock when I saw that, and I just realized sometimes if it's a field or an area that I'm not up to date on, sticker shock's easy. And so I think DJ kind of talked me off the cliff there and said, yeah, that seems like a reasonable amount if you get the right person. If you get the right person, it's worth double that. You know, over a 10-year period, it's worth a lot more if you get the right person. But it's maybe kind of like a typo or something in the contract, or maybe not. I just on compensation under Section 2. If Mark could take a look at that, if you have the contract in front of you. It's about the third line down. It starts with the amount to, or fourth line down, the amount to EGP would be no less than 30% of the net lodging tax collected on behalf of the city. And then after the parentheses, it says, in addition to any new LT revenues the city collects in the future. That could be read a couple different ways, and my preferred way of interpreting that would be in addition to 30% of any new LT revenues the city collects in the future, or some percentage that the city collects rather than any new LT revenues. Because that to me means if the lodging tax goes up, and not the lodging tax, if the room collect, if the net revenues go up, that anything beyond where we are today, the DMO would get it all. And I guess, Mark, maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, and I agree with you. I actually just showed Aaron the version that I did in mid-March, crossed that out, and it came to my attention this morning because I got the DMO's attorney's revisions on Friday afternoon. I looked at them this morning and I realized upon looking at it that attorney was working off a draft that was not the draft that I had provided. I don't know where that miscommunication occurred, but I agree with you. I had crossed that out. I have addressed a lot of the concerns that were brought up today in my draft. I don't think that my draft is that far apart from the DMO attorney's draft, but unfortunately what you're looking at is not really comparing apples to apples vis-a-vis what I prepared and what the DMO attorney came back with. For instance, Councilor De La Grange mentioned something about city property being transferred. I addressed that. Most of the property would be intellectual property. My way of addressing that is we offer, for instance, a revocable license. So they're not getting ownership of our intellectual property. I don't think that that's going to be anything that is a point of contention, but just to give you guys all a frame of reference, I've identified these issues and responded accordingly.
Thank you. You're good? Okay, DJ.
Thank you for addressing the intellectual property. I wanted to bring that up. Sounds like it's addressed. Very cool. I wanted to get in on the conversation about the term of the contract. I think 5 years is too much to expect for a term. 2 years sounds good to me. There's many reasons behind that. Councilor seats are 4 years. You know, we would have a fresh council rotate every time it's time to renew this contract. And that's too far distant level of awareness of what's going on with the DMO board. I'd like to suggest a 2-year term on the contract. With that checking in 12 months like we said we would. And then of course if everything's going great after 2 years we can talk about the term again, but 5 years at least for now is way too long.
All right, do we have any further questions for today? Thank you, Doug, for your willingness to be here and answer all the questions.
You betcha. Can I make one quick comment?
Yeah.
As I know you're looking at the percentage to give the DMO, I am basing our budget off of, I gave them the number of $700,000, which is kind of between the 30 to 35%. I would encourage you to do at least the 35%, and here's why. We are creating something brand new, and we're trying to do something really big for the city. You got a lot of people working really hard on it. I would encourage you to give us the opportunity to do the best job and fund our DMO to the point that they're not going to be fettered moving forward. Holding a person accountable to metrics and then withholding their ability to do that is something that I'm a little concerned about. I don't know where you're at with the voting, but I think this is an opportunity right now to kind of take a look at making sure that our DMO is funded to the best of our abilities so that they can deliver the returns that the City of Grants Pass is looking for, with the intentional and the overall goal being economic development for the community. So.
Thank you. Okay, DJ has a...
I want to bring this issue of the budget back to the table. We need to understand that this council is the warden of public monies, right? And we've been funneling money out of savings or whatever from the tourism lodging tax dollars with no conversation about where does this come from? Are we loaning them the money? Does this come out of their first contract? I think that it's our job to clarify that. It's our job to understand how much is this possibly going to cost and where are we going to make up those expenses come time to contract. Because right now we're funneling money without any discussion about that, and I'm just not comfortable with it. So if this council's comfortable with it, then I can just say then this is what council's decided to do, but I think we need to be very cautious about this.
Brian and Valerie.
Yeah, I'll support DJ on that. I think that, you know, we can't be giving anybody carte blanche to spend public money. So whether it's, we need to put something in writing that it's coming out of the first year contract or whatever, it just needs to be clear as opposed to unclear.
Valerie?
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with that as well. I will say that I think when the DMO went into it, I don't think they realized and recognized what legal costs were going to be. I mean, I have learned a tremendous amount in this process that I think anybody who was put into the process of putting together a board and putting together, because technically if you look at all the things that we were requested to do, which was to put together the bylaws, you have to have legal, you have to have legal to do that. So in one of our meetings, we said, well, we can't give you a contract until you have your part done. And I'm telling you, the board has done everything that was asked of do it, but you have to pay for that. And I don't think there's been any money that I'm aware of expended at this point, because the board recognizes, you know, and it's come to their attention, it's more than they ever thought it would be to start a board. And that's why I like the McMinnville that had a first-year plan, and that's kind of spelled out. And so I think that's maybe what we need to look into is that sort of thing, because I agree. But as I said, they were tasked with going out and getting the bylaws and getting this and that, and they have done everything that they have been asked to do, and they haven't taken anything that I'm aware of, unless some of the money came to the city and we didn't know it. They haven't brought anything forward because they knew they also needed to be responsible there. So I'm not going to I'm just trying to defend the board, saying, you know, they were tasked with doing something and they've done it. What the city's been tasked with is coming up with a contract, and that's where the issue's been, and that's where we're stuck right now. So we can't go any farther to get any money until we have a contract. It's kind of like the cart before the wheel before the cart. How does that operate? And we're kind of lost there too. So moving forward, hopefully we can clarify it. And I think it's understandable from the councils that they see the costs.
Vanessa, then Rob.
I understand what you're saying, Councillor Lovelace. I think what we need to establish at this time is if we want to, it's understandable. They're going to have to spend money to get this off the ground. That's completely understandable. We need to, as a council, decide if we want that to be just an investment into the DMO, or if we want that to come out of the first year of that 35%, whatever decision we make. So I think that's what we need to do at this time.
Rob?
Yeah, I agree with both DJ and Valerie on the points they made. I think getting back to something I said earlier, it's possible, and maybe Aaron, if Doug or the DMO has not had an official introduction to DMO Pros people, maybe we can just ask DMO Pros what they think would be, because anytime we're doing anything new and our board doesn't have any experience with it, of course, it's the first time they've done it, things are going to always cost more than whatever they think, and they're going to take longer. It's just, that's the reality, right? Well, DMO pros might have a much better idea as to what kinds of money we're going to be on the hook for. So I would hope that you could seek advice there from someone who's kind of seen it done before. One city's example might be helpful, but it'd be great. It shouldn't be, I would imagine it'd be a phone call, you know, to DMO pros or whatever to have them give you an idea as to, oh yeah, you know, you're going to end up spending 10,000 more or whatever it's going to be at this point forward. Or he might even say, you guys did a great job. You brought it in for less than what we thought it was going to cost for you to get this far.
Well, I can kind of address that. To my knowledge, actually, our board has not turned over any expenses to the city of Grants Pass other than the bills that I think have come directly to the city from our attorney. So I would look for council approval or ways for you guys to understand what we're going to spend and why. I have a couple of receipts, but those have not been expensed or approved by the council, but I still have them. So, but that's kind of where I'm at. So, and we do use those resources pretty regularly as we go through this process. So,
Brian, then DJ.
I have another question for Doug, but I don't want to take off of this topic yet, so I'll defer for now.
Yeah, thank you. Let's stay on this topic. I suggest that we take starting expenses out of their first year contract, but I also suggest we get this in writing. You know, we need to have an agreement that's signed by the city and the director that we are going to spend money. It is going to come out of here, so we have something outside of just a verbal agreement that there's going to be money spent. So that's how I suggest we deal with this.
Are you back on this topic, Brian? Okay. Is that what council wants to do? Do we want to have attorney and kind of these startup expenses come out of the first year contract?
Well,
Rob?
So, and I'm sorry, what are the potential or the projected startup expenses?
I think that's what we have on the sheet here, right? The $50,099 is
The one that the sheet we just got?
I think
Okay,
that's
thank you.
the
I hadn't had a chance to look at it.
projected startup expenses, yeah.
Okay.
And that includes,
that's just the starter board. That wouldn't have anything to do with funding the executive director and the DMO. That's just getting the attorney and everything and paid for.
right, so I can go over it. It includes getting a mailbox, some filing fees for the 501c6, the bylaws, tax ID number, attorney fees, $25,000 budget for Searchwide Global. That would be the headhunter organization, as well as $5,000 expenses, some internet fees for getting the website logged in and secured, and some basic logo branding fees and a small contingency fund. So $50,000 to get things going regarding the contract and hiring a CEO. And is the council interested in having that come out of the first year contract rather than being kind of an additional, you know, the cost that the city would pay prior to the first year contract? Valerie.
I would hesitate to rush at this particular meeting to do that, just because we don't know a lot of the costs moving forward. And I think, like you said, in terms of making sure that we get it right, I would hate to hamper, even if you put $50,000 less, and then you come up with a lower end of you could hamper the workings of the DMO. So I think it's worth taking a breath and making that decision after the board has a chance to hash it out and come back, as opposed to a one side. That would be my recommendation.
Okay, I heard DJ say sure, fair enough, so it was his proposal. Rob?
Yeah, I would agree with Valerie to slow this part of the process down. I wasn't really prepared to while I knew it was an important issue, I wasn't prepared to kind of make that decision today, especially now that we've seen that it's a pretty substantial amount of money, $50,000. So I'd like to slow that down and have us have possibly Doug come up with any other costs that he thinks might be on the horizon, and then also then we could take more time to discuss it. It might only be at our next meeting or workshop, but I'm just not really prepared to make that decision today.
Okay, Brian?
Yeah, I'm going to circle back to my other question for Doug. On this proposed, preliminary budget, there's the search-wide global at $25,000, and then there's search-wide global expenses at $5,000. Can you explain what the $5,000 extra is?
Yeah, on top of the fee for Searchwide Global, we would be required to fly in any applicants and have them, we would be doing Zoom interviews, but then face-to-face for those applicants that rose to the top. In addition, if we asked for any support from Searchwide Global, it would be on our dime to bring them into town. The silver lining to that is that we are actually still in the pandemic, so much of the stuff that we would do face-to-face will be done via Zoom. So there's some savings that we'll realize there, but that's what that is.
Was there any talk with the starter board of using other less expensive services? I know there's, LinkedIn, Indeed, there's various job websites where someone could just very easily type in executive director for a job search, and these positions will come up, and I know they're much less expensive than $30,000. Was that given any consideration?
Not really, because they're far different capabilities. This person will actually look to pair somebody that has reasons to be in Grants Pass, and she actually kind of built a little demographic for us, somebody that's looking for a good job to make a mark in a place where they can then kind of enjoy the tourism facilities that we have. It would be a nationwide search, and it just beyond looking for a good executive director, she would also be looking for a good fit for our community. Speaking right off the top of my head, I don't have all the information, but I was very impressed by her, and I would have thought the same thing you thought sitting there. Again, that's how I've always hired people. Why not just go to Indeed? Why spend the 25 grand? But her processes go much deeper than any of the things that you mentioned. They're just far different capabilities. So.
I see. Thanks.
Rick?
Doug, would you call this person a headhunter?
Yeah, actually, it's what they do. They look for the best person to place in a market.
So would it be proper to say when you have a headhunter that they'll go to people that are currently employed and not necessarily looking to change their location, but because they have certain qualities, they pursue them? So we could end up with somebody that is really top quality, where through these other online services you would never even touch them. Would that be
That would be fair to say. I wouldn't want to speculate on what her actual process is necessarily, but I would imagine that yeah, she would open those up. I've had people call me on my job and say, hey, we got a job over here. Just wanted to know if you know anybody. That kind of verbiage has been used. So, and I would imagine that if we hire her focus is going to be not just to find an executive director, but somebody that actually belongs in Grants Pass in Josephine County.
And in your conversation with her, did she have a good track record, and she's been in business for quite a while?
Yeah. I'm really going to be hesitant to bring anybody. Anything I bring before you guys is going to be defendable. At least that's the goal that I would have. You may agree or not agree, but I will have some conversation that can defend the actions or thought processes that are going on. So.
All right, I'm going to call on Rob, but I do want to note just that we need to be moving along soon. So if you have any final questions, raise your hand, but let's move on. Rob?
So you touched on a point that I was wondering yesterday. Has the board thought about, or is there an expectation that whoever's hired for this position is going to live in Grants Pass area or is going to be required to live in Grants Pass area. It doesn't really matter to me, but I'm just wondering if the board has thought that through.
Yeah, Grants Pass, Josephine County, they'll live here for sure, yeah. Or relocate to here.
I don't feel that it's necessary, but if that's what the board feels, that's
Well, we would want
understandable.
somebody in the community on a daily basis. You know, being an executive director of a DMO is not just advertising and buying ads. It's uniting communities, not just our local community here, but we're looking for somebody that will unite all of the tourism travel agencies throughout the state, make friends with neighboring states. This person's going to have all of these skills available. You know, one of the interviews I did, they asked me if I was interested in this job, and my answer was, no, we're going to get somebody that's qualified. So I think I could do it, but my perspective from the starter board is that we're looking for somebody that is just going to be a superstar. I'm good at the job I do, but it's not that, so.
Thank you. Any final questions? No. Thank you, Doug. And I will note that Terry Hopkins sent me a note earlier today that said he wasn't able to be here with us this morning, but he wants council to contact him if you have any questions about the contract or the starting up the DMO, and you can ask questions outside of these meetings as well so that we get to the end point a little faster. Next up, actually, we're going to switch up the agenda a little bit because we have somebody here to talk with us about Project Turnkey, and we do not have a non-staff guest here to talk about electric charging stations.
Mayor, I'm sorry, in my parting, can I just pass out a business card to each of you?
Sure, of course. Aaron's going to get us started on the Project Turnkey discussion.
Go ahead. All right. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I have a brief presentation on Project Turnkey, leveraging Federal CARES Act funds for housing in Oregon, transforming hotels to housing. Subject and summary is a request from Project Turnkey for a letter of support to establish affordable housing project here. This supports Council's goals of encouraging an environment which provides for growth of affordable housing and facilitating development of a homeless shelter and/or urban campground. Just to give you some background from what is Project Turnkey? Project Turnkey, Oregon legislature did allocate $65 million for a program called Project Turnkey. The purpose was to acquire motels and hotels for use as non-congregate shelter for people experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. There are two discrete funds, specifically with the $65 million, one totaling $30 million to be awarded in counties and tribal communities impacted by the 2020 wildfires, and one totaling $35 million for the remaining 28 counties in the state. So Project Turnkey really is a locally driven, statewide supported innovative shelter for vulnerable Oregons that takes Oregon hotels and motels, and it's a response to provide housing during the COVID pandemic. The mission is to mitigate transmission, reduce hospital surge, and protect lives with a focus on sheltering Oregonians experiencing homelessness. So locally here, the Oregon Community Foundation is administering both funds through an application and selection process with the guidance from advisory committee of the state, local, and community stakeholders. And the Oregon Community Foundation has an interest in establishing one of these Project Turnkey projects here in Grants Pass. There are a number of turnkey projects already in place. The map behind me shows some of the cities that have partnered with people like the Oregon Community Foundation to make this happen. The Oregon Community Foundation has requested support for this project, and that's why we're discussing this today. They're ultimately asking for you to support them through a letter of support on this project. They have a location. The location is at Sunset Inn, which is located at 1400 Northwest 6th Street. The support is what they're looking at is purchasing a motel hotel to be utilized as a non-congregate temporary housing shelter and/or low-income multifamily project here in Grants Pass. I put this slide up here because I thought it might be asked. We are going through a social services in general commercial potential changes, and this was just a timeline to sort of, for you from a perspective of if we were to ultimately allow social services in general commercial, sort of a timeline of what it would take. Currently, right now, social services are allowed in business, park, and industrial. So your call to action today is ultimately, Doug Walker, I think, is here today, and he can come up and answer any questions specifically for the Community Foundation, but to provide a letter of support for this type of project. And if council provides that direction, we could draft a letter for the mayor's signature and submit that to the state for support of this project. You can also postpone to allow for further discussion or deny the request for the letter of support. And with that, Mayor, I turn it over to you and council. And again, also Doug Walker is here to answer any questions with regards to the specific request for a letter of support.
Thank you. Can we have Doug come forward for a minute to talk? Doug Walker.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Thank you for letting me be here.
Yeah, if you could just talk to us for a few minutes about what you're interested in.
Yeah, I'm here also with Jed Keller, and Colleen Martin had to leave. She couldn't stay any longer. She had to be somewhere at 1:30.
Okay.
So she left. So again, we're with the All Care Community Foundation, and we've applied for the grant to bring the monies into the city to buy a hotel and turn it into multifamily housing. The presentation that the city manager Aaron provided is right on. And if you have any questions, we'll answer them, unless you want to add anything, Jed.
No, I think that it's a great opportunity, given that the state will help fund this and provide the capability for some housing.
Questions? Rick, Valerie, Brian.
So I don't know who wants to take, maybe Doug would take it. So under the current zoning, the motel has the proper zoning for this to occur, but when you start using it for a shelter per se, then we need to do the amendment that we're talking about?
Yeah, that's correct. We're intending to use it for multifamily housing, which fits in the current zoning. What we have to do is apply for a change of use permit.
Okay, because otherwise, I was going to say you can't run a motel like a hostel may have its own classification. You can't run a motel where you change the rules just for that motel and the only people stay there are homeless, but it's still a motel, so it doesn't need a change in the ordinance, but this one does.
Well, I think we may be talking about a couple of different things. We're going to apply for a change of use permit to go from a hotel to a multifamily complex. So the zoning allows for it, but the use of the building will change. And that'll be a new process we have to go through to get that permit.
Oh,
So,
change it so
am
it
I
doesn't
saying that right?
require.
yeah, no, I think you are. I think you're right. There's a couple of questions there that the councilors are getting at. But what they're doing is they're looking at a change of use from a hotel to a multifamily dwelling unit. Not necessarily social services like a warming center, which is more of a social service type of thing, which addresses your original question with regards to the conflict of use. But permitted use is ultimately a multifamily units in general commercial. General commercial is relatively broad. And so they can do this project, designate this as a multifamily project, and it would be allowed.
Okay, thank you. That helps me with the clarification.
Valerie?
Yeah, that's kind of the same thing I was trying to get through as well, because when you look at this schedule, if they have to wait till the end of this process, that would be crazy. So I think all of us would like to see it sooner. So by going through a change of use to a multi-family, and if I'm not mistaken, you have a plan for that by putting kitchenettes into the hotel rooms, so they are no longer just a hotel, but they actually can become a unit, correct?
That's correct, and that's a requirement of the city. And we would do that anyway, but it's also a requirement to allow it to become a rental housing unit. It has to have
multi-family usage.
It has to have a kitchen.
My question
Correct.
then comes to time frame. What time frame do you need to have the letter off in terms of the them allocating the funds, do you know?
I don't know the time frame. We're in a competitive grant process. We're competing with another 20 or so cities for the remaining funds. And we're trying to get all of our application in. It's competitive in both the quality of our application and the time at which our application gets there. The money with the state has to be spent by sometime in June.
Okay.
So as to your question, how fast does this need to happen? I don't know. Maybe Jed can answer it.
Well, we're currently in phase 2 of the process. We had to do a quick catch-up. All of the money for the turnkey project has to be spent by June 15th.
Middle June.
Middle of June. It appears that we can get they will fund the money for doing the kitchenette conversions. Okay. That money could transition as long as the building had been secured. So, part of it that they're concerned about is the zoning, the discussion we just had here. We think we have a route there that will meet their requirements. Clearly, they are very the people from the Oregon Community Fund are very familiar with Grants Pass. They want to know that they've got a community endorsement. That's a big step for us. So getting that done quickly for that support is a big event for us to move through to the next phase. All the money does have to be, they have a big part on theirs. They have to do the assessment, evaluation, appraisal, everything, close with the landlord and spend the money by June 15th. So that's a short time frame.
Yes, it is short. So that's, I think, the point I was trying to make is we need to jump on this. Thank you.
Brian?
Thanks for being here, guys. My initial impression of this project was that it was going to be transitional housing, and now I'm seeing that it can be used for temporary housing / shelter or low-income multifamily. And so do we know exactly the intent for the property? I'm hearing low-income multifamily, which suggests longer-term living as opposed to transitional housing. Do you have any more clarity to provide on that?
No, we don't. We're trying to develop that process both with the grant so we can be as competitive in the grant process.
Oh, can you speak into the mic?
No, we don't know yet. We're trying to develop that, figure that out. We're trying to keep ourselves as competitive in the grant process while finding a way to fit into the city zoning codes. So there's a little bit of a fine line we're trying to walk there. So we haven't developed that yet.
Would you appreciate any council direction or preference on that?
Yes.
Okay. I would prefer to be transitional, but that's just me. And other people can chime in. And then I did have another question for Aaron, since I have the mic, on the timeline for this development code text amendment. It's pretty long. I mean, it goes till October, and I see that the UAPC is in there. Could we theoretically bypass UAPC and shorten that timeline?
You may be able to do that. When I talked, there's a couple of things we could shorten up. We could shorten that timeline up maybe a couple of weeks, but we have the DLCD we still have to deal with. Mm-hmm. And there is question on, I was talking with Brad because I thought that question might come up. And I needed to talk with Mark some more. He highly recommend you do not avoid the UAPC on this type of activity. But I'm not sure what the legality is. Mark might be able to explain it some more, but it might be just a council decision, but I don't know.
Yeah, so you could call up, I mean, the council's the ultimate decision maker. So the lower tribunal vetting process is built into the code, but I believe the code actually does specifically permit council to call up a case and elevate something beyond the planning commission.
What was your reasoning for recommending to not do so?
I think that was Brad that
Brad,
did that.
okay.
Yeah, not me.
Very good, thanks.
DJ?
Well, actually, I had the same question, but I wanted to provide a little bit more. The one thing to be aware of is if we do circumvent UAPC, then the only appeal that could happen is to LUBA. So if UAPC did it, then the appeal would go to council if somebody wanted to appeal that decision. So just being aware of that procedure.
Joel and then Rick?
So, Doug, I appreciate both of you working to bring in outside resources to help solve this problem, and hats off to you. there's two expenses, at least two expenses in this, two types of expenses. One is the capital investment to buy the infrastructure. The other is the maintenance dollars to keep it up and to be something that is an asset to Grants Pass. So I had two questions. One is, what is the funding for the maintenance dollars? The second question I had was, depending on the source of what it is, we have different types of transitional housing and warming shelters and those kind of things. I've heard from my ride along with the police, the number of homeless in Grants Pass is one number. I've heard from Kelly, you know, at the nonprofit, a vastly different number. I've experienced some of it by going around. Is there any, I would guess that our capacity of the tent, the village, transitional housing, and the motels, that we're still not meeting the demand of the existing, would be my assumption, but I would ask what your feeling would that be, and what is the capacity then of the motel to add to that?
So two questions. Capacity of motel.
Please use the mic.
Sorry, sorry, forget about that. So, so sort of two questions. One, the budget and how do we pay for things in the future. That goes a little bit to Brian's point about transitional versus single-family dwelling or multifamily dwelling. Part of our grant application to the state is how are we going to pay for this into the future? And so some of it we're looking at maybe a third or so of the units being something like 60% of AMI or something for rent so that we can pay for the operations of the facility into the future. So that kind of goes to that. And some of the funds are similar to the way Foundry Village would be funded or is going to be funded, which is reimbursement from the CCO. So there's a whole bucket full of oddball bits of money that come and go that help pay for this. And that's part of the grant process to the state, is for us to show where the funding is going to come from. And that's part of the competitiveness of the grant, is can we prove we're going to be able to pay for this thing into the future? And so we're sort of trying to find those points and everything. The second part of your question, or the second question, had to do with a sense of the count for homelessness and whether this is going to, how much of the problem this might solve. It's one of the things we need to do in this community, so it's not going to by any means solve all the problem, but it's going to give us another tool. I suspect that the housing problem is underreported or under quantified. Those people that live in garages or are doubling up in rooms with people or doubling up in houses, I don't think it get quantified, but they pressurize the system and make it harder to find rentals, and the people that get squished out the other end are the people that have few resources, and they become homeless.
Sure, and thank you for that answer. What is the proposed capacity?
It's 34 units currently, 34 rooms. I suspect we'll have maybe 32 because we'll have to have one or two either laundry facilities, offices, maintenance room, something like that. So I really doubt we're going to get all 34 turned into rooms or units.
We've inspected the rooms and gone through the facility, and about half of the rooms are would be capable for families. So that's 2, 3, 4 people in a particular room. And as Doug said, we've gone through a budgeting process looking at where we can raise money. Even though people are low income, they can afford a little bit of rent. We've rolled that up, and that covers about 70% of the operating expense for this facility. And we think through some other fundraising efforts, similar to what has been down in Medford, that the remaining 30% can be covered.
Rick?
So I'd just like confirmation, clarification. If you pursue the multifamily aspect, change of use, then you're not subject to this text amendment. So we're not subject involving a timeline there, but you would still appreciate a letter from us, either from community development or from the council, that we're endorsing this type of project. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
I think the feedback we've gotten from the Oregon Community Fund and some of their people have extensive experience here, and there's an image that the community has been very resistant to this kind of support. So it's more than a like. I think for us to get the grant, we're going to need a written support from the City of Grants Pass endorsing what we're trying to do here.
Thank you. Further questions? Valerie?
Yeah, I just had one question, and you were talking about the further management of the process, of the program. Does this take like management through like a Rogue Retreat sort of nonprofit? And just kind of, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, there'll be an on-site manager, and then there's likely to be case management as well. Yes.
Okay, so that there will be the possibility of somebody else helping to run it as well.
Yes, I don't know if run it's the right word, but be on site for case management services to help people that are there that are transitioning, to help them get their lives back in order and get paperwork going and do those things that the case managers do.
In terms of the discussion that I just commented about the budget, we've included having people on site 7/24 just to supervise, make sure things are running smoothly, handle any requests that come up, things like that. So we will have on-site people.
Joel, and then Vanessa.
Well, this is kind of, when we ask questions, sometimes we already know the answer. In fact, about 95% of the questions people ask, if you ask them what the answer is. So the question is this, would the judge find this cruel and unusual punishment for a person to stay in this facility?
No, I don't.
No.
No, I don't think so. I think they're going to be quite nice.
And it would be an alternative then to what he has called cruel and unusual punishment in our injunction, is that correct?
I would think so.
Yeah, I would too.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, one of the nice things about this hotel is the gentleman who owns it's done a really good job of maintaining it. It's really in good shape.
Vanessa?
Thank you guys for all the work that you're doing and spearheading this. Has the board considered any terms of agreement for the residents staying on the premises?
No, we're probably going to just do something like a 2-week rental time period. So instead of a month, it'll be a 2 weeks.
Okay. Are there any fees associated with staying on the premises?
Fees? Is that what you said?
Yes, like
Fees?
a rental fee?
Yeah, there would be some. So we're trying to work that out in the budget. And so the current concept is that maybe 1/3 of the units, roughly 10 units, would be, the rent they would pay would be something like 60% of AMI. And then maybe 1/3 of the units would be 30% of AMI. And then 1/3 of the units would be $1, $5, something like that. Very affordable. And then as people move through the process and either get jobs or get other housing elsewhere, they move in or out or move up to the other units.
And also would this be a low barrier?
Yes, it would be.
Okay, thank you.
Brian?
So with regards to those different categories you just mentioned, is there time limits on the amount of time people can stay in those categories, or could someone, in theory, move in at 60% of AMI, and if their income stays there, then they can stay there indefinitely?
Well, currently we haven't gone through that process of developing that timeline yet, whether this is a transitory facility, when somebody's there for 3 years and then they have to move out at the end of 3 years, that's max. We haven't developed that yet. We're going to probably lean on Rogue Retreat and their experiences and how they've handled the one down there and other facilities.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for these gentlemen? No. Thank you both, Jed and Doug, for being here.
Thank you.
Council, are you interested in having us write a letter of support? Brian?
Yes.
That was the briefest comment ever. Thank you. Valerie?
It made me think, are we taking a vote? And I just don't know.
We can. It was more of a question, but if
Yes.
we're ready to just do a head count, sure.
Yeah, I would say yes, for sure. And I just want to make sure that we try to make it not tied into the change in the code as much as just saying multifamily project and how badly we need this help for the families, homeless families, or in all families in this that are at that level. So I guess the key is to make it affordable units, affordable housing, multifamily units, and focus on that. I'm afraid if you get into the transitory part, then you get into the zoning part, and I'm just kind of trying to avoid that issue.
Thank you. Vanessa?
Yeah, I'm in support of writing a letter in support of this as well. Also, just food for thought, House Bill 3261 just passed the House in the state of Oregon. It's moved on to the Senate, so depending on how quickly that is able to move through that chamber, that may even provide a possibility to circumvent the council. So with that, I support this.
Other comments? All right, well, now I'm going to make you vote.
Yeah.
So say yes if you are interested in having council write a letter of support. Brian?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
DJ?
Yes.
Vanessa?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Joel?
Yes.
We'll write you a letter. Thank you. All right, next up on our agenda, we have a discussion about electric charging stations and downtown restroom options. It looks like Jason Kennedy is presenting.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a very, very brief presentation, and actually we're just looking for a little bit of direction. This is to select options for the Portland Loos, as well as hopefully identify the first locations to put the Portland Loo, and then lastly to approve the location for the downtown charging stations. So behind me on the screen are the options. I also gave you a handout this morning which has all of the options for the Portland Loo. Several of you had asked about options for those facilities. Councilor DeLagrange had asked about solar. Solar is a viable option for these, which would require zero power. So we were hoping to get direction on selected options. If we were going to recommend a solar option, staff would recommend that we go with the combination solar and AC electric, just because in the winters around here, we oftentimes get extended periods of fog, and solar is not the most reliable long-term technology for winter. Any questions on those? Otherwise, staff will move forward with probably choosing the solar AC options, and then none of the other options.
Questions, Rick?
So in the solar, what I would expect is that you could find out from Portland too, since they do have a couple of units in operation there. I imagine with the LED lights in the batteries that they have, there wouldn't be an electrical problem, since the only thing is it's only servicing lights. It's not furnishing any other mechanical equipment such as heat. That may be adequate, and that could be quite a savings for not having to install the electrical and to help put towards the solar. But the other thing I'd like to know, what have they found as being their annual maintenance costs for the units, unplugging toilets, cleaning, and so forth? Because to me, that should be a consideration when you're looking at a fixture like this. What are we really taking on? And I would like to have that information in the future. Thank you.
Okay.
Brian?
Yeah, thank you for bringing these options to us. My intent with asking about the solar was that, maybe we could save some money by not having to run, AC to the units. So, if Portland Loo doesn't think that their solar option is adequate to run the light in the unit in the winter, then I don't know that we would need to spend the extra cost to do that. I would just, maybe just run AC if they don't feel that that's adequate. But if they do feel that's adequate, I think we should consider that. But to have the hybrid power just seems like spending more money for no reason.
I will follow up with Portland Loo on that question.
Valerie, then Kurt, then DJ.
Yeah, are we discussing the options down below that? as well? Is that, or is that something, another
If
conversation?
there are any options on the list that you see that you would want staff to include in any future order, we would like direction on that today.
All right,
Yes.
thank you. I just wanted to clarify that as well.
Kurt?
What would be the installation cost impact of the AC? As in, what if we went with the AC only?
Oh,
What
gotcha.
would the installation cost portion of that be?
It's going to be very site dependent, which we're going to talk about in just a second. If we look at a site like the Visitor Center, we already have water, sewer, and power installed at that location. And it would just be simply a matter of running a cable to it. If we choose a location like the Salmon Lot as a remote, and I'm just throwing out a parking lot, that does not have sewer. It has water, but it doesn't have good water and no power. So then we would be installing a new power service as well as a new water service. That would increase those installation costs pretty dramatically. So we're trying to keep them at locations where we have mostly utilities available. If the solar option does truly work through the winter, if we don't add on options, like there's one here for a powered hand dryer, solar may be adequate through the winters here. And if that is the case, then by not having to install power, you're probably $10,000 to $20,000 depending on the location.
Okay. Just another question. Do these have any logging capability? I mean, do we have any way of tracking how frequently they're being used?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Is that even an option?
Not on this sheet, but I can find out whether they have. I know that they probably can add some sophisticated options, but I'll inquire.
DJ, then Rick.
Yeah, I want to entertain putting hand washing basins in there. We're going to have water service there anyway. You know, a little step above for sanitation. I definitely want to entertain a hand washing station. And at the very least, have a conversation about a Sharps container. You know, I understand that might take a different level of management from the city as far as, you know, you would need more trained technical level to deal with that waste. So, you know, intravenous drug use is an unfortunate reality. I know you guys see them, I see them everywhere. Mm-hmm. If we had a dispensary of some kind, I don't know if it's appropriate to put them in the bathrooms, but at least have that conversation. But hand washing stations, big thumbs up for me.
So I wondered, Jason, because the hand washing station that we saw before, it was like a drain into the floor. So I think this cost is for a basin, like a sink. But
That is correct.
The hand washing faucet and drain is included in the base?
That is correct. The basin actually adds like a little basin where it's not just running the water directly onto the floor and splashing on your shoes. Yep.
Rick and then Rob?
So, Jason, didn't the original demonstration show a hand washing thing on the outside?
Mm-hmm.
Was that a basin at all, or just dropped to the drain?
Yeah, that was just dropping directly into a drain, floor drain on the floor.
Okay, and I just want to clarify, since that was the standard, DJ, did you want one inside the unit?
Yeah, I understand the distinction, and I'm definitely in favor of having a basin.
Okay, the only reason I might be hesitant on that, then, does it take in the it says cold air hand dryer, so that would be interesting, Jason, for you to find out whether the batteries are able to operate that. I question that. But question I asked before is on the toilet during freezing weather, and I see there's cold water toilet upgrade. Does that mean it has a heated seat? Do you know the details
No.
of
Yeah,
that?
what is that?
No heated seats. It just adds a little bit more heat tape for freeze protection. But the standard unit does come with heat trace to protect the most vulnerable portions. With the winters around here not getting necessarily that cold, this really is geared towards colder climates.
Okay, thank you.
Rob?
I can remember one particular winter about 20 years ago, we got down to about 10 degrees for a week straight.
Yep.
So it would kind of, you know, it would kind of suck if our if our public restrooms were frozen for a week. So that, even though it's may only be, you know, every few years, there's definitely times when I know that any animal bird baths and stuff I have out in my backyard freeze.
Yeah.
So that's real. So I'm concerned with that. I don't understand. Maybe I'm just too dense. We've had a couple different things. So the hand washing basin, is that available both inside or outside, or no matter what you use, it's still outside?
It's my understanding that you can get it put on the inside as well.
That's what I would be in favor of. I don't know what other people were saying.
Okay.
And I also, and I don't know, I think Curtis's point to having it monitored, the number of uses, I think is a really great idea, especially if we ever decide to add more, or you know, we can really know where they should go or how much the existing ones were used. So if that's an option, that's a really smart move.
I made a note to inquire.
So I think one of the things just for council to consider, that hand washing station inside and outside, I think one of the reasons why it was designed on the outdoors is to discourage washing of anything else besides hands in an enclosed area. And so you'll have more tendency to have that occur if it's indoors versus on the outside.
Rob?
So do they have, thinking about where you wash your hands, inside or outside, do they have different attachments to be able to open the door without touching it? Because I've seen some that you use your elbow to open the door. I've seen others you use your foot to open the door. But, you know, if I was going to be washing my hands outside, anyway, to me, that's a really, really great attachment for very low money if they have something like that.
I will also ask, I know that the interiors do come with a hand sanitizer dispenser inside, so you can at least sanitize before you go through the door, but that's a valid point.
And the other thing I'm thinking, because I know that several people that I've mentioned this to, especially in the downtown location, or I should say the visitor center location, they're wondering, would we really need, you know, is one enough? But I guess where people wash their hands is going to determine to some degree how long they've tied up the unit as well. So if they wash them outside, the unit will be open for toilet use. There'll be better turnover, if you know what I mean.
Good potential.
So it's just another thing for council to consider.
Okay. Vanessa?
My concern with having only a basin outside of it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. If folks don't see that basin, they may not be as encouraged to wash their hands. And forgive me if I missed it when I stepped away, but I would also like to see a baby changing table in the facilities as well. If we want to encourage folks to spend time downtown, that's going to be a necessary task for families.
Along those lines, having changed many baby diapers might be one nice reason to have the sink inside.
Okay. I've made notes. We'll get final pricing and come back with a couple more answers for everybody. So before we get off of that topic, I did want to circle back to the locations again. This is the map that we showed you previously with the two that Scott Chansey was going to be installing in conjunction with the bus terminal up here. As we look towards the center core, we're in this area. Councilor Pell raised the issue that maybe the grasshopper lot was not a good idea. So I wanted to come back, and if we could just start in the downtown core, whether we wanted to install one at the visitor center, as we had previously talked about, or if we wanted to just choose the grasshopper lot, or we can scratch that. A couple of notes I did want to make you guys aware of. The one at the visitor center may be tricky. As you can see, the sewer line is a long ways away from our building, and there is no adjacent sewer line. So if we can't tie into our existing lateral, which we believe we can, we have to run that full distance, which is a couple hundred feet, to install that sewer lateral. The one in the Grasshopper parking lot does have good access to sewer that will not be relocated. It should also be noted that this sewer line is slated for abandonment at some point in the near future. Near might be optimistic, but it needs to go away. We don't like sewer lines underneath major commercial buildings. So what we would like as a direction is the visitor center the preferred choice for the first location.
Brian?
So are we not able at the visitor center to tie that into the sewer at the visitor center building?
We do believe we are able to. It depends on the condition of that line. I do not want to say yes without fully TVing that line. If it was installed many years ago, it could be in very poor condition and it may be undersized. If we have to install a new one, we will just dig from here straight down through the parking lot within the easement and install a second lateral for the Portland Loo.
Okay, and I'll just say that if we were only installing one Portland Loo, my preferred location for the one we would be installing is behind the visitor center, so that would be my preferred spot.
Rob?
Yeah, I would agree with what Brian said. I would also go as far as to say that if we're planning on having a visitor center there, which I believe we should, that is regardless of how much the sewer work would cost out of the urban renewal money. I think that that's money we just have to spend to have that bathroom there.
Okay.
Hopefully the existing sewer line is fine, but absolutely that would be number one spot, regardless of the sewer line condition.
Yep, duly noted. So location number 2.
Jason, I'm
just
sorry.
a second.
I'm,
I apologize.
I'm curious. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the sewer ladder from the visitor center, where does it go?
We believe, we have not fully examined it, but it has to come over here and tie into this 12-inch.
Eesh, okay.
There is nowhere else for it to connect to.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Location number 2, we were looking at 3 of these. We would recommend either the Beaver or Duck Lot. This one, staff has looked at both of these sewer lines. The sewer line in the Beaver Lot is much newer and in better condition. The one in the Duck Lot, not so much. And we would recommend not connecting a sewer ladder or a new sewer lateral to that side. We also have water installed in the Duck Lot currently. It's an irrigation service. It only lacks power. I'm going to just move through the rest of these because we're really kind of flexible on all of the rest of these. Were we to choose the Salmon Lot, sewer is very nice. We have a lot of options for connecting the sewer all on our property. Water is already installed. Also, power is immediately adjacent if solar only does not work. The other location could be the Brown Bear. Sewer can be connected to the adjacent alley. However, water is only available in I Street, has not been installed at this location yet. So do any of those other locations jump out to you as selecting for installation?
Where is the Brown Bear?
Brown Bear is directly across from the Taqueria parking lot, Redwood parking lot. So as you look to the north, this is the Redwood parking lot, and Taqueria Mexican restaurant is right here.
Okay, thank you. We've got DJ, Brian.
Was there any consideration for the Owl parking lot on 5th?
There was not, and the reason is that is still being considered for a future plaza, and I didn't want to suggest plopping a restroom down in that location until we knew what the whole plan was for downtown. So we were trying to stay within the periphery of that and also stay within city parking lots.
Sure. Okay. Comment would be, I think all suggestions are great. I'm happy to see utilities there, but I think visibility is super important. Just think about you're walking through town, you want to be able to identify that location readily. For example, the Brown Bear lot, that's kind of, it's tucked into a little cove. It's not very visible from very many spots. So just think about that a little bit, but good locations.
Brian?
Yeah, I agree with everything DJ said just now. One of the keys to making these work is that they're super visible. They're as visible as possible, so that people that are not from here, can spot them easily and they're easy to use. That said, I went around and I went to all these lots and I kind of checked them out because I feel like this is really important. And besides the visitor center, the Beaver lot looks good, just because that's kind of, Jason said that one was probably preferable to the duck lot. I think maybe moving it up to the corner, where it's, has maximum visibility. I know you would have to put in a little bit longer line, but I think visibility is key for these, and so I would advocate for one to be put up on that corner. And then the third one, the salmon lot to me didn't look great just because it's kind of getting out of downtown. It's kind of getting into more, or I guess less foot traffic and less tourist use. And I would actually advocate for one on the corner of the Owl lot, right there up on the street. That location it's basically surrounded by bars and restaurants and shops. And it's in the downtown core, and I think it's going to see a lot more foot traffic than the salmon lot ever does. And I know there's the concern of the plaza there, but I think if it's up on that front corner, I think right now there's kind of a little bark patch there. It could be put there, and I think that a plaza could still be very viable at that location.
What is the lot behind the hall? And is there a reason?
That's the Osprey lot. We did not suggest that one just because it seems to be full of cars basically from morning till late at night. The other ones, there are times when there are slots open, and these facilities will take up parking slots in most likelihood, and if we can't get it fully into the landscaping.
I was just thinking that one is immediately across the street from the Owl lot, which would leave the Owl lot available for future development, but still that is a spot where we have a lot of downtown activities once we get back to the time when we can have activities again. Keeps it nice and close. Rick?
Jason, could you go back to the Beaver lot?
Yeah.
Okay, I have difficulty when I'm heading eastbound at that intersection. That would be G Street, correct?
That is correct.
I have difficulty with sight visibility looking at cars coming up, so if I want to pull out and cross and not cross, but make a turn when the light is red. So to put the loo right there would even block visibility even further. And I think also as well as our ordinances would probably not want to block that regulation concerning that.
Yeah, we'd have to look at our sight distances, the height and how far back it is from the intersection. It may prohibit what Councilor DeLagrange was hoping for, but we would have to look at that.
And one alternative would be to have some new signage that shows you where the restrooms are, and that may suffice to let the public be able to find it. Yeah. Thank you.
Rob?
Yeah, I think that the Beaver lot is a really good location. It's just that, as Rick said, the corner, I'm glad he pointed that out, and I'm sure Jason would have caught it also, but the corner is probably not the great location for it, but it could be halfway between the corner and the west edge of the lot, and that could be ideal, But because a bathroom in that general area, there is a lot of foot traffic. Safeway generates a lot of foot traffic, but I don't think we really want it on the east side of 7th Street because there is more foot traffic, downtown, closer to 6th. So, I think on the west side of 7th, maybe halfway between there and the westernmost portion of that lot could be really good. Yeah, the salmon lot clearly has got hardly any foot traffic in that area. And I think that, there's a little bit of problem with the Owl or the Osprey lot as far as future development. As Sarah pointed out, you wouldn't want to really tie the design of that downtown plaza to having to have the bathroom in the middle of it, or on the edge of it. It also could be that we could hold off on that. It's not like we're going basically right now from having no bathrooms downtown. It's not like we have to go to have a half a dozen of them. And I think in part what we need to remember too is part of the problem that we've had in the last year is that due to COVID, there's a lot of stores that have been closed, a lot of even fast food places that haven't been letting people use their restrooms. So we're going to have a little bit of a less of a restroom emergency as COVID lifts than we've had in the past year. So, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to having just the 2 locations and seeing how those work and potentially deciding how the downtown plaza is going to be designed to figure out if we want to get a 3rd one in that general area.
And that was actually going to be my next suggestion. We don't have to decide on the 3rd location. The first 2, I think, gets us way ahead of where we were. And we can cement our order with Portland Loo Company, and that helps us out. And then down the road, we can decide that location for the third one.
Vanessa, then Valerie.
I second that. I think Beaver Lot is especially important because that bus stop that's on the east side of 7th Street is a transfer stop for Josephine County Transit, in addition to the foot traffic. So I'm in favor of the visitor center and the Beaver Lot and the Owl parking lot to be explored potentially.
Valerie?
Well, I was just going to speak out in positive for the salmon lot. Though it seems like there's not a lot of foot traffic, I personally don't mind walking a little ways to use the restroom, and if you've got children or whatever with you and you're a group, the positive thing about the salmon is that there's actually a lot there to where it's not crammed into a small spot, that there's actually a field or whatever, and I don't know if they ever put a bench there, but that was something I know with the salmon artwork. They wanted to get some lighting on that and a bench out there. So just, I'm not opposed to putting a hold on the 3rd one and waiting to see, but I do think there's something to be said, as our traffic, as we elongate that business area, that salmon might be a good potential.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? DJ.
Yeah, so I'm just going to quickly chime in. Visitor Center, Beaver Lot, if we can adjust it for visibility, that'd be great. Salmon Lot, I think, is a good spot, maybe even adjusted for higher visibility, but I like Owl too. But the only thing that I had to say about that was, didn't we have some sort of deal for buying multiple units?
3.
3 units.
That is
correct. Joco is getting 2 and we're getting 2, so we will get that deal regardless.
Yep.
Would we still get it if we deferred into a 3rd one in the future? Do they still count that as?
Yeah, we can place the order and defer the delivery for, I want to say they said 1 to 2 years.
Sure.
Which buys us some time. We can also take delivery. This unit is stainless steel. We can park it in the city yard and wait for installation till you folks are ready.
Sure. It might be wise to defer the 3rd one. The last thing we want to do is put a public restroom in that never gets used.
Yep.
Oh, I agree.
There you go.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So lastly, I have 2 quick slides. This is going to Project
Jason,
LB 6400.
I think Rick has a quick question first.
I'm so sorry.
So I just wanted to make sure we will have the additional information before we finally give the go-ahead.
Yeah, we'll bring back an order with additional information, but we will not sign a purchase order until council is in full agreement. Yep. LB 6400, this is downtown charging stations. This is a project that was originally brought to you by Director Glover. The application previously were for installations at the Visitor Center and the Beaver Lot for 2 units. We were originally asking for $60,000. The project was originally authorized for $60,000. The grant received was only $49,457 for the installation of 2 charging units. That's very important. There are no other resources that are allocated to this project. And so what I wanted to do is just confirm that council is okay with still installing these charging units at these 2 locations. We do believe they're good locations. They are type 2 chargers. They are 3 to 4 hour charge time. 2 parking spaces would be dedicated at each parking lot for these installations. I will mention that probably the Visitors Center would be more beneficial for a type, that's supposed to say 3, I apologize, type 3 charger. That would probably require an additional $30,000, $25,000 to $30,000, but it is a much faster charge. The reason for that is you could turn people through that parking lot a little bit more frequently, whereas at the Beaver Lot, they could be there, they'd be walking downtown, eating dinner at a restaurant. The 3 to 4 hours is probably not too bad. So I just wanted to confirm the 2 locations and with the potential location of where those would be. And if so, then we'll move forward with that purchase and installation.
Questions? Brian, then Rob, then Rick.
Thanks, Jason. I'm really looking forward to these going in. I think it's well past due. I have an electric car. I know other counselors have electric cars, so I think this is great.
Yeah.
I think the Beaver Lot location looks fantastic. If you could go back to the visitor center slide. I went down there this morning too to look at this, and it made sense to me to possibly have those charging stations be over closer to 6th Street, kind of where that other car is parked there. Over in that area. And you could even cut that little landscaping area because it kind of juts out, and you could have a whole nother parking spot there if you cut that straight. They would be more visible for people coming down 6th Street. And I actually have an idea for that back part of the visitor center to possibly turn it into a little bit more of a green space, which is a conversation for another day, but putting the charging stations there would negate that possibility. So I would advocate for those being moved closer to 6th Street.
Yep.
Rob?
When I was on the parking task force and we brought this matter up, I was under the impression that we were talking about the Type 3, the rapid chargers, and that's kind of what that's what the discussion was.
Yeah.
And somehow this got morphed into a slower charger, and I'm just wondering, because I have no knowledge in this area, for the electric car owners on the council, do you guys ever use the Type 2 charger if you're in transit or visiting somewhere, or you're looking for Type 3s?
Brian, Vanessa, Rick?
Well, I can speak. I know Vanessa and Rick have Teslas, and they have a different charging structure than the car I have. I have an older electric car that uses the Type 2, and I think the problem with the Type 3 is not that it's faster, but I think that there are multiple Type 3 technologies. There's the type that Tesla uses, there's the type that Nissan uses, there's the type that GM and Chevy use, and so if we got a Type 3 charger, it most likely would only service one type of vehicle, but feel free to correct me on that if I'm wrong, guys.
Each car, like my car, I'm fortunate I have different adapters, so I can pretty much go anywhere. So, but if you don't have that adapter in your trunk, you aren't carrying it with you, and it can be expensive if you have to buy it on the aftermarket. Then you're stuck to the dedicated proprietary charger. The other thing that I have a question on, these chargers will be for free?
So at this point, they will be charged, but they can be for free if you choose so. We just have to then figure out where the revenue to pay for the power that's being consumed will come from.
Because one of my concerns, like when I go in traveling, you have a certain amount of time to charge your car, and when the charge is full, if you don't come and disconnect and remove your car from that location, you're charged $1 a minute fine.
Yeah.
And otherwise, what I would be real hesitant here is have somebody pull into that and they're gone for 6 hours and they just use it as a free parking spot. So I think it would be advantageous if we were charging.
Okay.
And I don't know if Vanessa wants to add more to that.
Not necessarily. Councilor DeLagrange covered that really well, and you did as well. It depends on the adaptability of the vehicle and the potential parts that you have for that and that you carry with you. A Type 3 is always going to be more attractive because it's a faster charge time. Type 2 might be fine if you plan on spending all day somewhere, but Type 3 is more attractive.
Rob?
So, oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just calling on Rob if you had
I was just going to add, so we also inherited this project in the middle. The grants had already been applied for. The funding that was approved will not purchase Type 3 chargers. There's not enough money to do that. So we would have to identify some additional resources to upgrade. We can still use these funds to purchase Type 3, but we will need to supplement with city resources.
Yeah, I guess we'd have to have that discussion then, whether we want Type 2 or 3, if 3 is available at additional cost.
Yep.
I guess question again for the electric car owners. When you go to start charging, do you know pretty much exactly how long it's going to be for your car to be fully charged? So then you would know not to spend 2 hours at a restaurant if your car is only going to take 20 minutes to charge. Yeah, thank you.
So with the Type 2 charger, if you're down 100 miles, it could take you up to 5 hours to charge it. So, but the other thing too is like out at the hospital, if that helps anybody, they have Type 2 chargers out there when you pull in. They're not really intended to be distance charging. They're just to supplement while you're there.
Rob?
Yeah, I would look at putting the Type 3 chargers in downtown as a real draw for tourists. I mean, if people are only going to, if it's going to take 5 hours to get 100 miles of drive time out of a Type 2 charger, to me that's investing in technology that basically already is or should be obsolete. I mean, you know, it's not going to be much of a draw for someone coming down the freeway to know he's got to have his car parked 5 hours to drive the next 100 miles. So I would look at that as a real tourist draw to having people come off the freeway to know when they look on the dashboard of their car or whatever where the Type 3 chargers are. Because right now, they'd have those at the north end of town, but there'd be no reason to come downtown if your car needed to charge unless you had a Type 3 charger. So I'd be very much in favor of upgrading those.
Okay, so we can look for additional resources. The other, I believe the ones that are operated by the other visitor center, the chamber, are actually not owned by them. They're owned by a private company. If you are interested in partnering with a private company to own and operate those within our city parking lots, we can look into that as an option as well, and then just scrap this grant altogether.
I wasn't suggesting to scrap the grant because if they're going to get us part of the way there, it would be really great to use it. But initially, I know when we brought this forward in the parking task force, we did talk about it, and actually I think we brought Rick in as our resident expert, and he gave us a little talk. And it was like decided kind of that, hey, Type 3 really sounds like the ticket, sounds like what we want to have in the downtown.
Got it.
And to me, to use something that's kind of halfway there is almost like, in some ways, throwing that money away if we could add a little bit more to make it a real attraction.
Okay. Brian?
So I would agree with Rob that it would be great to have Type 3 chargers downtown. We have a grant opportunity to get Type 2 chargers, which are not worthless by any stretch of the imagination. I use them in Medford, I use them in Ashland. They're very useful. And they do see a lot of use in those other cities. So I think, you know, not utilizing this grant would be foolish. Even if it's not for the Type 3, we can have further discussions about using urban renewal or other funds to put Type 3s in, but I don't think that we should miss this opportunity for free money and essentially putting free charging stations downtown just because we want Type 3. And then I also wanted to very quickly speak to the point of paying for the charging. The Type 2, because they charge slower, they don't use as much electricity. So if you had all 4 of these charging stations charging 24 hours a day, which obviously is not going to be the case, it's going to be much less than that. But if it was all 4 24 hours a day, it would only cost $50 a day on electricity. So, you know, it's probably going to be half that or a third that. So the cost of the electricity is negligible, and I don't think that funding that would be an issue per se.
Valerie?
Yeah, for the most part, I'm kind of leaving it to those of you who have electric vehicles because I'm not familiar with them. But I am going to go back a slide just to, or forward, I think it's back a slide. Just where you have the yellow and the green. I just want clarity on where the station, that one right there. So looking at that, are the orange ones right now, are those Type 3 that we currently have?
The orange are Type 3 that are located within the city of Grants Pass.
So there you have 2 of them that must be up by the chamber. Then the green ones are
Type 2.
Type 2, and those are currently owned and run by, they're in town now. So we're actually adding to that, am I correct?
Yeah, this was just a web app that I found that helps electric car drivers find open charging stations. And so these were the ones that were identified within the city. And you can see that definitely downtown we are void of any chargers and they would be beneficial downtown.
And I agree with that. And so I'm going to go back to, if you're a person who's just looking for a quick charge, you're probably going to just get right off the freeway and go there. But I kind of like the idea of them having to come down and spend a little bit of time. That's the whole purpose of the downtown, is that, okay, if you're going to go downtown, I can catch a meal or whatever. So I don't have any problem with there being, you know, type 2 downtown area, because I think that's what you do. You say, hey, you know, it's going to take a little time. Let's go downtown, check out the downtown what our car is charging. So that's just my 2 cents. But I'm not an electric car driver.
Rob?
So I just want to make sure if I understood Jason correctly. You said that we could use the existing grant, which would basically pay for the type 2 chargers. We could also use that towards a type 3 charger. There'd just be an upcharge or additional cost to the city.
That is correct.
So we wouldn't be throwing the grant away to get a type 3. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Janessa?
Yeah, to continue on that, for LB 6400, the $60,000, that was the anticipated grant amount that we may have received?
It is. We originally applied for these in 3 locations and were approved for only 2 in the final grant amount of the $49,457.
Okay. I would be in favor also of using that grant money towards purchasing type 3. My personal perspective on it is that if we are able to get faster charging stations downtown, that will draw tourists from farther away. And it's more of an incentive to come to the downtown rather than on the outskirts.
Jason, with the grant, are we obligated to do 2?
No, but if we only do 1, our grant funding will be reduced by 50%.
And how much does it cost to put in a type 2 and how much does it cost to put in a type 3?
So the type 3, we are estimating just the cost that we looked at would require probably an additional $25,000.
For 1?
For 1, yes. They're quite a bit more money.
Can you do
They also will probably require upgrades of electrical services to be able to deliver that power. They won't just work on a standard power connection.
So does a type 2 cost $25,000, half of the?
Yeah, we can get both of those installed for that $50,000, the type 2s.
Okay, and then you need some location direction?
Yes, the locations were actually submitted with the grant applications. What we were hoping for is confirmation that these locations are good. I would take into consideration Councilor DeLagrange's suggestion that we look at this island change and moving those to the front, because I think that is actually a pretty good idea. And then also just at the Beaver lot being the second location, which also is very visible and a good location.
So you're really looking at 1 station at 2 different lots?
It's a 2-port station, so 2 people can be charging at the same time.
Okay. Brian?
So just one other data point to share. Since my electric car is so old that when I go to Ashland, I have to charge. I cannot get to Ashland and back, so I have to find a charger if I want to get home. So they have a lot downtown, and it used to have, I think, 4 chargers, 4 of the Type 2, and they were almost always full. So I would have trouble there. And they just, this last year, upgraded that lot, and now they have 10 or 12 Type 2 chargers. They don't have any Type 3 chargers, but they have basically a whole small lot of Type 2s, and even now that's usually over half full. So there is a lot of demand for the Type 2, just anecdotally.
All right, I have heard no consensus on this issue whatsoever, but heard good arguments in favor of both options.
I have a question.
Valerie?
I just have a question, because obviously you said there are companies that do put them in themselves and then cover the costs and run them. So, so that's always an option if you can get somebody to come downtown, to ask a company to come in and put a Type 3 downtown. Am I correct? I mean, if that's something.
Yes, I see that Mark is gone. We would have to, because you're now allowing a private company to operate a business essentially on the city's parking lot, we would want to have a conversation about that.
Okay. Well, my preference is to just go ahead with the 2s right now, and then in the future, I mean, that's my recommendation right now.
I think we've heard Councilor De La Grange in favor of that. What about the rest of you? Thoughts? Joel's saying 2. I think I heard Vanessa say 3.
I'd be willing to support that recommendation.
2s at both lots.
Yes.
Rob? 2s. Rick?
2 works because I think it matches up with what's out at the hospital and it's still convenient.
Okay. DJ and Kurt? Okay. Moving forward with
Thank you.
2s at each lot. Thank you. Where does that bring us? To agenda review, eh? And Valerie, did you have something you wanted to bring up? Mike?
Yes, I do, and I'll talk about it, but I also have a copy of the city does a summary for the levy, so 1997. They do a summary of what the costs, what explains exactly where the taxes go, and it has to be agreed to by the Secretary of State, and it came back. And in the past, the council has put those in the water bills to get out to all of the constituents to educate them about what the levy costs and what will happen if the levy fails. So we have a copy of that, and we'd like to have it put in the water bill, but it needs to be done right away because the April water bills start on Wednesday to go out to the public. And so if we're going to do that, we need to get the approval of the council right now to move forward with that. So that's what I'm bringing forward. I will, in one of my piles right here, I do have a copy of it to pass out to the council. So just give me a minute to get organized and I'll hand it down. Rick?
Valerie, I think the last time we looked at doing that, there was a cost involved. Do we know what it would be this time?
Yes, Jay Meredith actually looked into it, and he said it would be cost up, I think, 1.5 cents per printing, which is approximately $1,500, I think.
Yeah, 1,552.
So it is 1,552.
Brian?
Yeah, I just wanted to get clarification that this statement that would be going on the water bill is something that the Secretary of State has reviewed and approved as non-biased?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
So yes, this would be an informational sheet about the proposed levy renewal.
Yes.
Cost us about $1,500. What do you think, Rob?
So that statement is prepared, or you're handing it out?
I'm handing it out.
Right.
I'm going to take that and pass it down. And it does say on the bottom that it has been approved by the Secretary of State and is non-biased.
You can take a minute to read it over. I think for purposes of just moving this along, is there anyone opposed to including this in the water bill? All right, let's do it. Thank you, Valerie.
Yes, thank you.
All right, coming up Wednesday, we have a meeting Wednesday evening. First up, a proclamation in favor of Arbor Month. Public hearing on to consider an ordinance that would make an amendment to the adult use business code. Public hearing on the comprehensive plan zone amendment for the Grants Pass Downs. A public hearing on the ordinance to declare scenic resources. a public hearing on the CDGB award amendment that just got added. Is that a, oh, that was to correct something that we did last time?
Yes.
Okay. Just to briefly explain, when we gave those awards to the nonprofits a couple weeks ago, there was a little discrepancy in the dollar amount, so we're just going to review that. Council action for an SDC grant incentive for the Active Sports and Family Chiropractor, SDC grant for Vice Brewing, motion regarding the Washington Boulevard street trees, resolution to discuss a request to use for alcohol use in Riverside Park, and the consent calendar, just one little item on residential backflow testing contract. Questions about any of those items? Valerie?
I just want clarity on the public hearing part of the scenic resources. Is it actually a public hearing, or is it just we're doing a second reading?
It started out as a public hearing, and it's the second reading to conclude that. So you're not taking public comment or anything like that. You're just opening for a motion for a second reading.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you. Rick?
Aaron, if somebody had a comment they wanted to make on that, could they make it in the public comment period?
Now, the public hearing has been closed. You're on the second reading. If council wants to make any kind of point or discussion, you can after you've had a second, first a motion and a second, and then discussion before you do the reading. But it's not, there isn't an opportunity for the public to provide additional comment on it, as that was the previous meeting where the public hearing was open for public comment.
Correct. But in the open session for public comments that are items that are not on the agenda?
It wouldn't happen until later in the meeting. The just open public comment?
That'd be after that.
Would be later in the meeting, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions about Wednesday? No? And then next Monday's workshop and special meeting. Did we ever get an answer back on airport funding request?
Yes, I did hear back from the Board of Commissioners, and they still would like to have the request for the city to contribute to the airport.
Okay. And then, so we have airport funding request, wayfinding and parking signage, conditional use permits for social services, parklet program, and an executive session regarding property, which I believe is a follow-up of our previous executive session. That's going to be several large items, but comments, questions on that? Rob?
I'm sorry, what did you say about the county and the funding for the?
The agenda item for airport funding is the county has asked the city to contribute $250,000 over a 5-year period at $50,000 a year to support an airport runway expansion project.
All right, anything that anybody wants to add or a question about a future agenda?
I'm just asking, going back to that request on the airport funding request, I think at one time the CEDC was really involved with that. So should we invite somebody from the CEDC? I don't know who's giving the presentation, but just because we do try to have the heads of the committees come in, that might be a good time to have somebody come in from that committee.
I guess it wouldn't hurt. Brian.
Yeah, I've got, I guess, two things. The first one is, and this is probably something that I would maybe like a memo on as opposed to having it be in a full-fledged workshop presentation. But I think it would be useful for council to be able to see the the amount of money that the city has received in grants, maybe over the last 3 years, just as far as kind of a metric as far as the grant writing position and how much money that position actually brings in to the city. So if, and I will go further to say that the reason that I think that having that information would be a good idea is because I've asked myself the question if, if we have one grant writer bringing in, whatever, $250,000 a year, if we had a second grant writer, could we bring in, $350,000 or $400,000 a year? Would another grant writer position be worth paying for if they were able to bring in more than we were paying them? And I think that with the change in the federal administration, that there might be more grant opportunities coming up in the next few years than there have been. So the first piece to all of that was to see, kind of our historical grant performance and to see if it's even worth having that conversation.
Aaron?
So from an operational perspective, if staff believes that it's important for the organization to, if we're underperforming in a certain area, like, hey, we need another grant writer, would be my responsibility to bring that forward to council to consider and maybe propose through the budget process. We can definitely do a memo and provide you with information on our grants and what we received in the past 1 to 5 years. Whatever you'd like to do, we'll put a memo together if that's what council wants. But from a standpoint of FTE to hire for something, that's more of a management responsibility and to determine if it's needed or not. So.
Is there council interest in getting more information on grants received over the past couple of years, 3 years? Valerie?
I was going to say, I don't think a memo is a bad thing to have. I think sometimes that's the stuff that works behind the scenes that we don't see. I think that is an important thing for us to look at as to whether making any decisions. I would just like to see that information.
Thank you. Vanessa is saying yes. Rob?
So I have a question along the, I don't think, no one was saying that the grant writer is underperforming, but are there any services out there that get paid on commission that could potentially give us more grants and they take a percentage of it?
So in a way, when you say paid off a commission, we work with RVCOG also, and the commission that they get would be the administrative fees associated with it, because they get 5 to 7% of administration fees for their operations. So we've done programs with like RVCOG for that, and we've utilized their services in the past for certain grants that we believe that they might have more specialized abilities in.
I was actually thinking more private sector. I'm just wondering if that's because private sectors are typically going to be more aggressive, and they're typically going to if their only existence is commission. I'm just wondering if those services are out there that we could get more grants without necessarily having to hire another employee.
Yeah, the majority of the grants that we're getting, they do again provide for some small percentage of an administrative fee, but say a federal grant, a state grant, doesn't usually provide for the cost to pay for I haven't quite seen that. Again, the administrative fee associated with the grants is really that commission aspect of it when it comes to grant writing.
I believe that this information can be gathered outside of this meeting. This is captive audience kind of discussion right now, and I'd like to move on. Thank you.
All right, so I got 3 counselors interested in the memo. Joel?
It's a different subject.
Different subject? Okay. Do we need me to take a roll call?
Well, there's 3 counselors. I was just going to say maybe a 3-year.
So yeah, just do it. If you got 3 council members, you're good.
Okay. Joel, new topic?
This isn't for any immediate action, but in May, the Historic District Code amendments, we'll need to put that on. So we need to put that on the list for middle to late May. The committee's going to be reviewing public comment on that and then getting back to us on those code amendments that we previously looked at.
Right. So following up on that we kind of kicked that can down the road a few weeks back, didn't we? Okay, Valerie?
Yeah, I just have a question. On this America Recovers Act, the money that's coming to cities and councils, cities and the county as well, has there been more clarification in terms of exactly how it can be spent? Because Darren mentioned this morning that they had gotten some clearer picture. Have we received anything?
We're still gathering information. I actually have a meeting with some individuals this Thursday to talk about that some more. And as soon as I get additional information on what those categories are, et cetera, I'll make sure to forward it to council.
Okay, thank you. Because I know one of the things previously that we had gotten, one of the prohibited uses specifically said using it to directly or indirectly offset revenue from a tax cut. And so my question was, is that something that we could say in terms of, because we've gotten the question, if the levy, with the money being there, can we replace the levy with that? So my question to you is if the levy doesn't pass, is that a tax cut? Do you know? Can you answer that?
That ultimately is a potential for council to consider. That's a much larger policy discussion on what to do with the funds and whether you utilize it for operations or for capital type expenses.
Okay, I guess I'm just trying to clarify, because in going and trying to go through with passing the levy, we get comments about, you're getting this money, can't you just turn it over? And so I'm just looking for clarity when I explain to people that that's not the intention of the money. So.
Yeah, I think it's a very important point, and Adam will speak here in a second too, but it's very important that these are one-time injection of funds. And to take a capital type expenditure and use it for operations, it's a mixed match of funding. You usually want to take those one-time injection of resources and utilize that for some kind of infrastructure, capital type of projects, reimbursement from a standpoint of business incentive, yes. But to utilize it for ongoing and future operations, you'll end up spending it and then you'll have nothing to show for it at the end of your 2 or 3 year term.
And I know that, but I'm just trying to make sure that we have as much ammunition as possible to clarify that with the public.
As far as the specific guidelines on allowable uses of these funds, the Department of Treasury has a target date of May 11th to come up with the guidelines. They're creating a whole new office to administer the disbursement of these funds. So they're working on it. We do have some very broad categories, but I too am desperately anticipating getting that clear guidance from them. And May 11th right now is that target date.
Thank you.
And I do want to assure council that between Adam and I and stuff, we're on it, and we will make sure to inform you as soon as we get additional information, because there is going to need to be a large discussion policy-wise and community-wise when it comes to the funding, and we're going to need direction from council on how you want to address that.
Well, and this morning in the Government Affairs office, they had been talking with several of the legislatures and about the money coming through, and one of the things that they said, because they're hearing a lot of counties and cities being concerned about people's expectations of this money, was that how important it was to come up with a clear plan that you could get out to the people and be on the same page with. So I guess we'll wait till the May, because that's huge, to when that gets put out. So thank you for that information.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Valerie?
I make a motion, we adjourn this meeting.
Thank you.
2:43.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, see you Wednesday evening.